Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome one and all to the Defiant Takes Football Show. I'm Max Dean. You can find me on Twitter at @TheMaxDean, and I am here with Nick Merriam, who is our Director of Draft Content and Scouting at Defiant Takes Football. You can find him at Nick with Sports, and Kyron Samuels, who is our offensive line expert and insider at Kyron Samuels. Big show today, guys. We are on the eve of the legal tampering period. We're going to be talking about the news that has happened over the past few days since this past Thursday. We're going to be talking about what to expect a little bit as the news starts pouring in. We will probably conclude our show right as the legal tampering period officially starts. So there's going to be a lot of news rolling in. We might get a couple of headlines as we are live. And then, of course, we're going to talk about the AFC East, which is our final divisional preview for the offseason in the nick of time. Nick, how you doing today?
I'm good. I'm kind of just having the realization that Kyron probably knows some things already, but probably won't say it on the show. But it's we'll get information at noon, and it'll be fun to react to it.
Maybe we'll get a little bit here and there. Kyron, how you doing, man?
Doing good, man. I know a couple of things, but those will be out soon. But I don't know the good stuff, the juicy stuff. I'll be getting as everybody else gets it, or maybe I'll get a text or something during the show. But it's going to be interesting here because a lot of moves have to be made, and a lot of surprising moves will be made, especially when we talk about the draft position too. Some teams drafting up, some teams that we might not think would draft up are probably fighting to draft up here. So it'll be interesting to see how all the calls move here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at this point, there's a very real chance that the Aaron Rodgers news drops right before the eve of free agency. I'll leave it up to A-Rod to go down to the last possible minute and try and leak into the legal tampering period news wave. That's 100% a Rodgers type move. All right, let's shout out Noah Ashley, our producer here at Defiant Takes Football. Noah, how you doing today, man?
Doing well. Got my second cup of coffee for the day. Just keeping my eyes open for anything that may happen while you guys are chatting it up.
You and me both, man. You and me both. Noah's going to be helping us out with anything that comes down the wire as we're live here. But I'm looking forward to it, man. It's going to be a good show. And as soon as we conclude, we're just going to be getting that full wave of additions and subtractions. And we've got plenty already, especially, it's a great day to talk about the AFC East because there's been some movement there. So kind of gives us a built-in opportunity to talk about some of that. But all right, let's do it. Okay, so where do we want to start, guys? I mean, I think I'm just going to run down the banners as Noah's got them here. So the Bills have extended Matt Milano 2 years through 2026. I assume this is to lower his cap hit a little bit. One of my favorite linebackers from the league this past year. Great in coverage, not a huge player, but really, really smart, very, very fast. I had him as my second team All-Pro as we did our late season All-Pro rankings there. I think this is a great move. I think this is a glue guy. And if they are going to lose Tremaine Edmonds, then it's nice that they can lock him up for an extended period of time while they bring in another guy to probably slot in next to him. Nick, are you as high on Matt Milano as I am? I don't really remember.
I think he's a good player. I'm just kind of not a person that really believes in getting high-end linebacker play every year from one guy, except for Fred Warner and Bobby Wagner before he gets to his 30s, which even he played well last year. So Milano's a good linebacker, and I think they needed to retain one of these guys as a short-term deal here, just because that position group can't be horrific. As we talked about pre-show, Kyron and I, they're kind of in right now on everything. They're just going to start loading up on this roster again as they've lost some of their pieces to free agency. They're going to try and draft high-end positions, high-end players, try and hit on some guys. And this is really the last year of kind of what Kansas City had when they had Tyreek Hill for the Bills, where they're invested in all these high-end players. And if they don't really win, even if they win, I think they're going to end up probably changing some of the main parts next offseason.
There will be some turnover, no doubt. What about you, Kyron?
I think he's a solid football player. And in that system, what he's allowed to do and what he's capable of doing. He's been flourishing the last couple of years, and familiarity is like a big thing here in the NFL and in sports in general, right? So you can't let both linebackers go. I mean, presumably Tremaine Edmonds is gone. They're not going to be able to afford him. Presumably Jordan Poyer is gone. You're not going to be able to afford him. There's going to be some shakeup along the defensive line in that front. You don't know what you're going to get from Von Miller as far as health going forward and what they'll like to do with his contract. So there's a lot of uncertainty on that side of the ball for the Bills right now. So getting a guy like Matt Milano locked in, he's young. He's presumably in his prime. It's a good thing for that organization to keep a guy like that. He's going to be a glue guy, and he's going to be a guy that you can count on to potentially be another 2 or 3 years all-pro level. So good move for them. Great deal for Matt Milano. I don't know if the particulars have come out, but I'm sure he got a nice little lump sum, and he's going to be paid very handsomely. So I think it's a win-win here for both teams, for both situations here.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I think it's good that he's back. It's nice that he's a little bit less expensive than Tremaine Edmonds, and I think he's probably a little bit more consistent as a player as well. So if you want to take another swing in the draft, you can. There's going to be guys available, but you got your coverage guy, which is key. Okay, so next up, big news came back. The Dolphins have acquired cornerback Jalen Ramsey for a third-round pick and tight end Hunter Long. Nick, you dropped a pretty reasonable tweet the other day when this came down. So what is it exactly about Hunter Long that makes this deal worthwhile? To be fair, I think this is really more about getting Ramsey off the contract books, off the salary cap than anything. But the Dolphins take a big swing. They've got a bunch of expensive players now, a bunch of proven players. So they're going to need that to come together. But certainly you have a much better defense projected when you've got Jalen Ramsey on one side and Xavier Howard on the other. So, do you think that Jalen Ramsey is still going to be one of the best this year? Because we talked about it this past year. He still was very good. Maybe not the best in the NFL. We do expect him to be good for a bit longer, right? I think you had talked about potentially moving him to safety, but probably have a little bit time left on that, don't you think?
Yeah, I think I don't remember which of us it was. It might have been Kyron who brought up moving to safety. But I think that's a natural transition for him at some point. I think last year he was good enough. The team overall just wasn't as good in LA, so I think that kind of hurt his maybe media, how much people were covering him and saying he was playing well this past season. He was fine. I mean, it just wasn't a great season overall for that defense and really team as a whole. He's a really good football player. He's one of the best corners there is. He's going to be 29 at some point this year. He's a little older. You're trading for a guy who probably doesn't have a long-term future in Miami. I think, 2-year deal, probably get him for a year here. If you transition him to safety, maybe he's on a pay cut and a different contract. If not, he might not even be in Miami for more than a year. I don't really know what the plan is there, but which is the reason why he's not a guy who's going to go for a first-round pick at this point in his career. That being said, the Miami definitely wins this deal, right? A third-rounder and Hunter Long is basically nothing for this type of player who really, again, impacts your upside as a football team. Dolphins are kind of, I think, in a similar territory to what the Rams were a couple of years back, maybe not as aggressively acquiring, players who are more questionably going to give you upside. But, we've seen them now get Bradley Chubb and Tyreek Hill and obviously trading up for Jalen Waddle. This is a team that is in on trying to win a Super Bowl, and their high end is that. We just need them to be healthy. They need to find maybe a couple more pieces here that really give them kind of that ability to beat teams like the Bills and the Chiefs at the end of the season, and maybe make that run game a little bit better. Maybe they stop the run a little bit better. But Ramsey is one of those guys who steps in and you immediately see a boost in your secondary. I was interested just in the Hunter Long part of the trade, just because I don't know, he's a guy that. So we talk about all these random Y tight ends who are solid players in this year's draft. He was that a couple of years back. He was, a third-round pick, solid player, Boston College, wasn't fantastic at anything, was a good blocker, had a pretty good catch radius, and then went to Miami and then just never played. And Miami acquired these other tight ends. And I don't know if there's some upside with him still, but the Rams obviously valued him in this trade to some degree. And I don't know, it's a big. I'm just interested to see how he fits into the process in Los Angeles this year.
Yeah, it's interesting because you'd think that if there was any time where that he'd actually become useful, it'd have been now for the Dolphins. But they had Durham Smythe, who's a better blocking tight end. They had Mike Gesicki, who's just a really good receiver. And I guess Hunter Long is just like the forgotten man. And it seems like Gesicki wouldn't be back, so maybe Long would have been more involved. But ultimately, if that's what seals the deal, to send a third-round pick for Jalen Ramsey, just do it, even if you had plans for him. I think that's how I would approach it personally. What about you, Kyron?
I mean, I'm pretty excited about it from the standpoint, first of all, from the personnel standpoint. He doesn't have to roam around. He doesn't have to, follow the number one everywhere. He can just play outside corner now, which is going to be a huge asset for the team because you have Xavier Howard on one side, you have Jalen Ramsey on the other side, and Kadir Kehu, the young rookie going into his second year now, he's going to be the guy that's going to be covering the slot, and he's going to be the one that moves around and takes a lot of the difficult matchups. So it's going to be very key for the defense to I think linebackers the issue now, but getting the linebacker core straight because the defensive line is going to presumably be still very good. You have Bradley Chubb coming back. They're going to sign Christian Wilkins. He's not going anywhere. Siler might be on the move. We don't know with him, but presumably the defense line is still going to be really good. But you have the safety. You're not worried about safety with Javon Holland and those guys back there. I'm really excited about what he gives the team in terms of depth here. And you presumably cancel one side of the field, man. Like just playing outside corner, being able to man up and do his thing out there is going to be really cool because we haven't seen that from him in a long time. He's been the guy that's been shadowing the number ones, and he loves to take the difficult matchups. You saw him in the slot a lot this year. So that's going to be cool. But I still think that he's a top 3 to 5 corner in this league. Last year, just running through some of his numbers, he had 88 tackles, 18 pass breakups, which was second in the NFL, 6 tackles for loss, 3 forced fumbles, 4 interceptions, 2 sacks, a fumble recovery. He was as productive as anybody in the National Football League last year. And I don't really take his struggles too seriously last year because you look at who he struggled against. I mean, it was Devontae Adams. Devontae Adams is the best receiver in the NFL. And a lot of those plays where he, gave up some big plays, he was in pretty good position, man. Like Devontae Adams just made a better play and it was a better throw. So I don't really take people have been, nitpicking about him a lot. He's been so good for so long. Anytime he gives up a big play, everybody's saying he's washed now. I don't believe that. And I did bring up the fact that he should probably think about moving to safety here soon, just because I think that he could be even more productive at safety, just running around, making plays. If he was able to get in a role where he could play a free safety and just run around and wreak havoc. Obviously, he's not going to be able to do that with the Miami Dolphins. That could be maybe like a last-ditch effort for his career in another 2 or 3 years now, since he's just going to be primarily playing outside. But I'm really excited about the prospects of this guy being on this team and what that does just for invigorating life into the team. Like, that's going to make the offense more excited. That's going to make the defense just feel that much more confident and secure in their ability now, because you got to think about what that offensive room looked like before Tyreek Hill. I mean, you had Jalen Waddle there. You had some guys that were decent, but you bring a Tyreek Hill in there and everybody's play went up a level. You could assume that's going to be the same deal here when you bring a guy like Jalen Ramsey to the defense. So I'm really excited about that. And they're going to need it because probably going to get another quarterback infused here to the AFC East here pretty soon. You got Josh Allen to worry about. The Patriots are the Patriots. You can never count those guys out. So defense is always a priority here, especially in this division.
Well, look, I mean, the additions that they've made this offseason would, suggest that it's going to be a lot better on the defensive side of the ball. They swap out Josh Boyer for Vic Fangio, who's, generally considered one of the best defensive minds in the NFL. And then they swap out I'm not even sure. I can't forget now who was playing outside corner opposite Xavier Howard while Byron Jones was hurt. And you bring in Jalen Ramsey. So, you would hope that this defense performs at a much, much higher level. Again, although last year it wasn't necessarily even the skill of the players that really were the problem. They had plenty of talent, but this does take it up a notch. So the other AFC East teams are going to have to be on notice at this point. So, guys like Garrett Wilson and Stephon Diggs, it's not going to matter, where they try and line you up, because there's going to be somebody who can cover. All right. So next up, the biggest news of this past week, the Chicago Bears trade out of the number 1 spot. The Panthers go up and they send a number 1 pick this year, number 1 pick next year, DJ Moore, their number 1 wideout, as well as a few other picks, including, I believe, a 2nd-round pick this year, a 2nd-round pick in 2025, I want to say, and I think a couple others. We've got them here in our ticker below. But, man, this is a big win for the Bears, in my opinion. I think in terms of what they got in return, this is one of those times where this package means different things depending on which team sends it, right? So I'm okay with this from the Panthers' perspective, or at least I would be in another team's perspective, but now you're going up to number one, presumably to take a quarterback, for sure to take a quarterback, and you just sent away your best pass catching option. That's not something I love. If you were a team with a veteran quarterback or a different situation, sending away DJ Moore is not that big of a deal, but you would want somebody sort of established there. And then from the Bears side of things, for them to get an established pass catcher, which is something they have desperately needed for a while, they kind of made a desperation move this past year to get Chase Claypool. This brings in that guy who is a much more reliable target, a guy that's actually going to be able to help Justin Fields develop as a passer in a way that Chase Claypool, it's just not what he does, right? He doesn't play with that type of consistency. They also get the picks. Yeah, would it have been nice to get another first-round pick? Yeah, but sure. But you needed this. You really needed this guy. And so now they can move back. They can draft a defensive player. They can draft an offensive lineman. They can do whatever else they need to do in this draft, depending on who's available. But they've got their pass catcher, and they've reloaded in terms of their draft picks. So I love it for the Bears. I understand going up to one for the Panthers, but I don't love giving away the guy that your new rookie is going to be throwing to. Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, they have to go acquire more receivers regardless in this draft. That was like the one position group I think that they lacked clear starters at going into the season. They have depth problems at some other positions, but receiver was already going to be one. So they have their second-round pick still. I think that a guy like Josh Downs could be somebody they target with that pick, but it's very clear that they're going to need to add at least one or two bodies. They have some money maybe now to work in free agency because they get rid of more. But the way they're talking about this, it sounds like the Panthers didn't really identify a quarterback. They like the three of the guys at the top of the draft. Getting to one gives them kind of a choice. They know they need a quarterback. A lot of teams like to get these deals done before free agency so they can kind of operate. And depending on the way things had gone already with trade discussions, there's a chance DJ Moore maybe was not too against the idea of being out of Carolina in the first place. And I think we're past the days of giving up 3 first-round picks for anything. I just think we've seen that kind of fall flat far too many times for franchises. And it's like, yes, if you were able to get Patrick Mahomes for 3 first-round picks, like that would be a fantastic trade as a hypothetical. But anything less is kind of like you got a great player that you can't surround with anything because your main source of finding players on cheap contracts are not around for almost the entirety of whatever contract of the player you've traded for. So they had to find another way to get this deal done. Moore is probably the best player remaining on the roster. Brian Burns, I guess, is there too. So you can have a discussion about that, but they didn't have to give up both, I guess, which is a nice thing, but they also spread out the picks a little bit. They're going to have a second rounder still next year. Obviously their first rounder the next year after that. And I think they'll find ways to surround whatever new quarterback they have with players. And this isn't a bad roster, right? Like whoever steps in week 1 for them should have with Frank Reich and that coaching staff, the ability to develop somewhat quickly with the surroundings they have. And then next year, if they really need to attack receiver, they can, and to make that year 2 jump.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I will play devil's advocate on the other side because I think there's a way that the Panthers can kind of bounce back from this move. But Kyron, how do you feel about this? It seems like a win-win from the Bears' perspective. Are you in agreement with that? Are you more critical of the Panthers, or do you think that this was the necessary move to get their guy?
Just from the Panthers' point of view, because I don't think it's necessarily that complex. I think one or two things are going to happen. They really like C.J. Stroud. They're going to stay in that spot and take him, or they're going to use this to bait somebody, presumably the Texans, or I heard the Raiders were possibly involved. Somebody's going to trade up to take that number 1 pick and take the guy that they want. So I think it's a good move for the Panthers. I do understand the DJ Moore situation. He wasn't happy there. He wanted to leave this season. I mean, it was pretty, noteworthy that he talked about it leaving during the middle of this season. So he's a really good player. I think for what you got for him, you can't really complain about it. I mean, you think you're going up to get your franchise quarterback, and then like Nick said, you can presumably take some young guys around him or go get a guy in free agency, depending on who's available. Maybe a guy like Odell Beckham that wants to still, be a high-level number 2, maybe a low-level number 1 receiver. maybe get a guy like him and pair him with a young guy. You don't know, but I think it's a good thing from the Panthers' perspective. And I'm interested to see what happens from the Bears' perspective because they have a ton of money and a ton of picks. But when's the last time we see somebody completely retool their roster that wasn't already really decent in the first place? I can't think of it. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the most recent thing I can think of is the Jags. But they got a lot of guys that are free agency, right? Like the guys who were impact for them, they weren't young guys. Trayvon Walker was a good player. I mean, he started off and he was a very good contributor. He did his job, and I think he played actually a couple levels above what people kind of like credit him for this year, and he's going to only get better. But the majority of those guys, they got their quarterback, and the majority of those guys are free agents or guys that have already been there. You look on the offensive line; those are all old guys. They went and got Brandon Scherf. Like they have a lot of older guys. They have the skill room was completely retooled with free agents. Like I'm just going through the process here, and I can't think of how many teams rebuild the team through the draft. If we're just being honest here, so I'm a little bit leery here because everybody's like, "Oh, the Bears won, the Bears won, the Bears won," but you still have to go find the guys. That's the hardest part now. Like you have the assets, you have the ability to go do it, but can you do it? So that's the biggest question I have here. Is what are the Bears? What direction are they going in? What's the process here? Because you have the picks now, you have money now. What are you going to do with that? It can't just be acquiring, because then you just become Sam Presti from the Oklahoma City Thunder, who has a bunch of young guys and a bunch of money and a bunch of picks, and you don't really have a lot to show for it. So I'm really interested to see what Ron Poles and company does there. Because they have to have some sort of direction now. So they've just been in acquiring mode now. But now we need to see something going forward. So I'm really interested to see that because I don't necessarily think I believe it's gonna be as fast as everyone says it is. I don't really see a clear path for them because they have the quarterback situation that's a lot more tricky than, say, a Jacksonville Jaguars situation was. They knew they had their guy. They knew they were going to do everything and build around that guy. We cannot say the same for the Chicago Bears here. So while they're in rebuild mode now, they could be another year or two in the future and be in this same situation all over again. So verdict's still out on them. I think there's a lot to be excited about if you're a fan of the Chicago Bears. But now you need to start seeing some result here.
Yeah. I mean, I hear you. They were really hamstrung by both draft picks and cap space this past year. And so there wasn't a lot that they could do. I think, the one thing that I really would have pushed for was to try and figure out something at pass catcher so that you didn't have to try and make that desperation move halfway through the season, because you could kind of see that coming. Now, there's a lot to like about Justin Fields, but like you said, it's not locked in stone that he's going to be a decade-long starter for them. At least now they have the resources, right? And we've got to at least give them the chance. They've got the cap space so they can make a lot of moves in free agency. They've got a better player at their biggest position of need. And then they've got draft picks that they can use to try and make that defense better, or offensive line, wherever it is that they decide that they need to focus in on. The one thing I'll say about the Panthers is that this move becomes a little bit more palatable if they go out and they spend a lesser pick, like a 5th round pick, 4th round pick, whatever it takes to bring in DeAndre Hopkins or a guy like that they can have on a 1 to 2 year rental that will help out their quarterback, right? So, because DJ Moore's younger, because the Bears just needed that guy, they were able to include him, get that package done so that they could go get their quarterback of choice. If they can replace that veteran receiver in a way that it is, both, I guess, inexpensive enough that they're not really draining themselves of picks and still getting that guy, then I'm pretty much happy with the move. And then we just got to see who they decide to pull the trigger on in the draft. And I'll say this right now, I think it is all smoke about them moving back. I don't think that makes any sense at all whatsoever. Because I believe that I firmly believe that the Cardinals would be interested in moving back for a substantial package. And so if the Cardinals if the Panthers were really interested in not having specifically the 1st overall pick, then they would have just moved up to the 3rd and probably given up less overall. To go up and then back, it doesn't really make any sense. Moves like that are pretty unusual. The Dolphins moving back and then back up a couple years ago, it doesn't happen that often.
Back and then back up makes more sense than up and then back, though.
Yeah, I would be absolutely shocked if they move back. They're taking a quarterback at 1 at this point.
Yeah. Just I want to say one thing really quick about Chicago's situation is that the O-line was decent last year. A couple pieces I think could make that unit not bad, especially already as a run blocking unit. And now you have like a 1 through 3 at receiver with Mooney, Claypool, and Moore. So they're kind of going to get to see Fields with a little bit with more surrounding cast than he's ever had. And that answer, I think we will at the very least get like a pretty solid answer going into the next season. And then let's say he's not the guy because you have an extra first and second now. If you want to kind of use those resources to go up and get a different quarterback, they have the ability to do that.
Yeah, no, I think it's fair, and we just got to see what they do, right? I mean, I think at the very least you have to give them credit that they put themselves in a position where they can execute. Now we just have to see if they do it. All right. So those are some of the biggest news stories. Considering what we had there, probably kind of bearing the lead to lead with Matt Milano. Love him, but but yeah. So let's talk about a few other signings, extensions, moves here. Stick in the AFC East for a sec. Patriots re-sign guard James Ferenz to a 1-year deal. It's just something that we can comment on briefly, but the offensive line traditionally has been the strongest, if not one of the strongest units for the Patriots. So continuing to maintain depth there is good for them. They will probably need to make some moves because I don't think Isaiah Wynn's going to be back there. So, keeping some guys around before going out and making other additions is probably a good idea. Anything notable Nick?
They need depth. I mean, they've had some injuries in their O-line the past few years. It was a good unit for a couple of years, really, and I think they've gotten a little older, and they're going to start having to draft again there. Isaiah Wynn's a free agent. They just need to shore up kind of some of these spots to make sure they don't end up in a spot where they have injuries again. They're throwing out guys who are completely don't know the system and are, they need to have some solid plan here going forward just because of the aging that's happened a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kyron, how do you feel about James Ferenz?
I think he's solid. I mean, it's just you bring a guy back when you sign a guy to a 1-year deal. It's for that exact reason, just depth. I mean, you see what he has. Probably knows the system more than you're going to be able to teach somebody. He's a pro. I think it's a lot to be said for just being a professional, especially when we talk about drafting young guys. It takes some guys a year or two just to adjust to being a pro. Just that transition of this is your life now, doing it every day, being in the meeting rooms, being professional, all that good stuff. So if they trust him enough to bring him back on a 1-year deal, it's a guy that they really like, a guy that's handling his business, a guy that's going to be where he's supposed to be and just be familiar with the process. So good deal for him. I mean, obviously, anytime you get a 1-year deal, you're probably on your last legs here in the NFL a little bit, especially when you're not of notoriety or you're not a guy that's getting a 1-year, $10 million type of deal where they really expect you to be a contributor. So good for him because he's going to be able to stick around for another year and improve his work. And good for the Patriots because they obviously trust him. So nothing too crazy here, but I think it's a good fit for both.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let's move to the Jets, who have made a couple of signings in the past 24 to 48 hours. First of all, they re-sign linebacker Quincy Williams to a 3-year deal that averages about $6 million per year. And there are some incentives there as well. I believe it maxes out at about $7 million per year tops. This is a nice move for them because this keeps Quinnen Williams happy, who is a player that they would like to extend. And having his brother here is a bit of an impetus for him to not play as aggressive hardball with them because he was one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL this year. So he certainly could if he wanted to. But he is a family-oriented guy, so being able to play with his brother, you gotta think at least it doesn't hurt chances of getting him back under contract long term. I expect it to happen either way, but it helps. And also, Quincy Williams is kind of an emerging linebacker. He's, he probably plays a little bit like Tremaine Edmonds in the sense that he's a big hitter. He gets places real fast. Sometimes he gets out of position real fast as well. So you'd like to see him kind of pull everything together, but good signing for them. I'll also say they trade for Chuck Clark, safety from the Baltimore Ravens, inexpensive player who is looking at, I think, although his deal is about $5 million per year, the Jets get him for, I think, slightly less than that. It looks like they're getting him for about $4 million this year. So a reliable player. who, they've needed that. And this could be the writing on the wall for Jordan Whitehead, who was, a free agent signing by them, and probably he's a solid player, but probably not necessarily good enough to warrant the price tag. We'll see. We'll see what they decide to do there. Maybe he'll take a price cut. Maybe he'll be released. Maybe they'll just keep both of them for depth. They've also placed a second-round tender on defensive end Bryce Huff. So Bryce Huff was a undrafted free agent that they signed. He's been a contributor all 3 years, and he was a restricted free agent. They placed a second-round tender on him. He is one of the most efficient pass rushers in the NFL this past year. While he was on the field, which was in limited snaps as a designated rusher. So he'll probably get a little bit more opportunity this year to see if he can be somewhat useful in the run game as well. At this point, it's really been all pass rushing, but he's quite good at it. So few moves by the Jets here to round out their roster before free agency starts. Any thoughts on the three of these players, Nick?
Yeah, I like that they got Huff back. I mean, when they had their best stretch of pass rushing during the season, Huff was a really important designated pass rush guy who can kind of come in and finish games off for them. And I just, I think that he deserved to get re-signed by them, needed to get him back in there. I think they, as a team that has had a lot of talent on the D-line, but maybe going into this year, not as much depth as they've usually had. So getting him back, I think, is like very, very relevant signing for this team.
Yep. Would agree.
I don't have too much to add to that.
I mean, most impactful.
These guys a lot more than I do, Max. So I would defer to the Jet stuff on you. But obviously the Williams signing is everything to do with Quinnen. Like, let's just be honest about that. He's a solid for sure. He's a solid player. He's a solid player who could potentially develop into a really big contributor. But this is more about making Quinnen happy, making sure Quinnen is going to be satisfied. But I think it's actually counterproductive because you have to. I mean, it's not like a huge chunk of money, but any money you're taking away from potentially adding other assets around the team, potentially at a more position of need, I think they could probably have been in the running for another offensive lineman. We don't know who tackle guard, what the situation is going to look like, but some of that money probably could have been used towards an offensive lineman or maybe another one-year edge type of guy. So, but Quinnen being happy is important. Getting that guy re-signed is going to be number one here for them. So I think that's a good move for them. And obviously, the other guys better than I do. So I'll defer there. But I don't want to see them making too many moves here because it's time for the Dolphins to make that leap.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think this has dramatically changed the Jets' status in any way, shape, or form. It's more about maintaining some of the contributors that they've had this past year. And yeah, you're right. This is about Quinnen Williams. And, they've been high on Quincy. They've stated that pretty consistently. They claimed him off waivers from the Jacksonville Jaguars, and he was a relatively high pick, third rounder in 2019, I believe. So, he's not nobody, but this is one of those things where if he does kind of contain his game a little bit, this could end up being a steal. But at worst case scenario, it just helps those negotiations along. All right, so moving along here, the Texans made two moves. They re-signed safety MJ Stewart to a 2-year contract, as well as they brought in Robert Woods on a 2-year, $15.25 million deal. So they bring back one of their own, and they bring in another player who spent the last season in the AFC South as well. Does this suggest that Brandon Cooks is out of Houston? Do we think that he's moving on? Because you would imagine that they'd want to spend one of their high picks on a pass catcher this coming year, right? I think we all expect them to go quarterback with one of them, but a lot of people expect them to go receiver with the other to pair with their young quarterback. So what do you guys think about that?
I think Nico Collins at this point is a guy that they wanted to see if he could become a one, is more likely a depth player they really like. So Woods is kind of insurance for a couple different things, one of which, if they aren't able to acquire like a clear receiver in the draft, Brandon Cooks, I think, probably will be gone. And depending on, I would ask Kyron, because I haven't actually thought about this guy in a while, but John Mechie dealing with a couple of things this year, whether he's back and ready to play, will fit into the slot if he's ready to go. And if that's the case, you would have a solid 3. Woods has had his injury problems. Mechie's coming off of an ACL and cancer as well. So question marks. They have some very, very intriguing guys. But this is a nice, like relatively cheap deal on a veteran who can play good football still. You're kind of buying low on his market considering he also coming off an injury. And just it makes sense from their perspective because the O-line is very solid as we discussed. They're going to be getting a new quarterback in the building. Just have a high floor at receiver at the very least because that'll help the guy develop.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't have
I mean,
too
it
many
makes sense.
thoughts about it. I think this lets me know Mechie's probably not as close to returning as we probably thought he would be. This is what I thought here. I heard a lot of good stuff about him. Being everybody says he's doing well, but is he doing life well, just being a normal human being and being able to function and having his faculties, or is he football well and being able to play? Those are two vastly different things. So I keep hearing that he's doing very well, but taking it slow with Mechie. But Brandon Cooks is still there for now. I mean, I like it because he's a very good blocking wide receiver. This is things that people don't talk about when you talk about wide receivers, but he catches the ball. He's very reliable. He played a full season this year, which is really important when you talk about a guy like Robert Woods, who's had some injury history. He played a full season. He's very reliable, and he's a very good blocking wide receiver. So at this price point, which is not crazy, especially when you see what the wide receiver market is now. I mean, got like Christian Kirk got what? He's getting 18 per type of deals now. So when a guy like that is getting that, a solid vet that's going to presumably be able to help a young quarterback adjust, it's worth it. I thought it was a little bit strange, but then more I thought about it and really sat down and processed it. This is a good job for both of them. He's probably wasn't going to get this amount of money from anybody else, and he's going to be able to help a young quarterback develop a little bit.
Yep, agreed. I mean, he's a nice, reliable guy. Maybe not as explosive as he once was. But also, if they are going to be running the wide zone scheme in Houston, which you would assume with D'Amico Ryans coming in there, then he's a guy who has experience in that system. He also, blocks well on the outside, which is something that's actually important for receivers in that system because you got a lot of running backs bouncing it outside. And, if you don't have a gap there, then not super effective. All right, let's run through some more of these before we move on to our actual AFC East preview. Colts, they re-sign Tyquan Lewis to a 1-year, $2.1 million deal. Nothing too crazy. Again, a lot of these moves over these past 24 hours leading up to legal tampering are depth guys that are just, not necessarily looking to test the market or push value up, just get some security for themselves and teams shoring up some of their depth here. So Tyquan Lewis, he's been good at times, but he's never been a dominant player. So this is probably a pretty good deal for them. I would imagine that probably could have pushed that a little higher if he did go to the open market. But the Colts do need some defensive line help, so getting it done now doesn't hurt. Nick?
I'd argue if Tyquan Lewis doesn't get hurt against Washington, the Colts beat the Commanders last year, probably. I mean, he was playing really well in that game, and he was having a good year. Injuries have kind of derailed his early start in the NFL, and I think this is unfortunately cheaper than maybe his worth is. He just hasn't shown you can see on the field yet. But this is a really like a buy low signing for a guy that I think can be an important piece of their front four, and I think they're happy to have him back. And there's a reason it's 1 year, and that he probably thinks if he can go in there and play a year, that's good enough. He might get a pretty big paid the next offseason. So, and I would expect that from him as long as he can stay healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add here. I mean, a lot of these guys are just prove it guys. Like, hey, you've shown that you're able to be a decent to solid player. We don't have a lot of money. We need somebody who can probably be productive. We're going to take a chance on a guy like you. So this is the type of deals these are, and go prove it. So I'm excited to see what he's going to do. A guy with some raw ability. Like, this should be the time where that's transitioning into production on the field. So if you can get a really productive year out of this guy for $2.1 million, you're going to be very excited about it. Now he has another opportunity to go prove it. So I'm excited for him.
Hey, we had a market setter yesterday. Are we going to talk about that?
In a minute.
So I'm wondering this is towards the end.
Yeah, we'll talk about it in a minute. We're going to run through. Right. So here's one other that I just wanted to bring up as we close out the AFC here. Jags, we're getting there. The Jags, they re-signed CJ Beathard to a 2-year deal, just to continue being the backup. But here's another prove it guy. And he was a contract that I actually really liked last year because he played well for the Bears. he had some nice flash moments, and now he's getting a deal after proving it with the Jaguars. Defensive lineman Roy Robertson Harris signs a 3-year, $30 million extension. So this is great for him. I'm glad that he was able to go somewhere and prove his value because he was a fun player. I don't think anybody, not a person outside of the Chicago fan base, knew who Roy Robertson Harris was. But now he gets his money. So this is cool for him and a guy that he came on well. Nick, do you what are your thoughts on Roy Robertson Harris before we get to your favorite defensive lineman?
I know who he was. I mean, he fits the Nick. What we talked about when we talk about D linemen in our film breakdowns is kind of what I wanted from a guy that's developing. He just hadn't really put it all together in Chicago. Get off and immediate push. He was always good at that in Chicago. It just hadn't really put his game together. An Urban Meyer signing, right? Like Urban Meyer really was the guy who went out and get this for Jacksonville. So I guess for the people who believe he wasn't as bad as he was, I guess there's a win for Urban Meyer. There you go. There are dozens of them.
Yep. What do you think about Roy Robertson Harris, Kyron?
Well, I'm really happy for this guy because he's one of the unsung heroes of the NFL. I mean, I was talking to my guy, Brian Fajoko, that plays for the Chargers, and he texted me about it because he was really excited because it gives guys like him hope that one day they can get a bigger deal like this because a lot of these guys go under the radar. When you're doing the dirty work, when you're being productive, especially for not a big market team, you kind of go under the national radar. You don't get a lot of media, you don't get a lot of love. But when you turn the tape on and you watch these guys play, they're extremely productive. So I was really happy for a guy like this to get paid because it shows how much they believe in him. It shows that they have good talent evaluators because a lot of people in these organizations think these guys are expendable as well. So just like the normal media narratives, they kind of go unsung. A lot of these guys go unsung in the building and end up walking and going to a different team and either getting paid or being, productive in a different situation. So it was really cool on that end because it shows the people in that building believe in him just as much as guys that are like watching the tape and really respect what he does on the field. So I was really happy for a guy like him to get paid.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That will wrap it up for us in the AFC. Couple of small moves here. Sorry, I'm not going to spend any time on the punters and long snappers, so we're going to skip over that. The Giants get Sterling Shepard back, agrees to a 1-year, $1.3 million deal, so brings his cap hit down a little bit. Another guy that's just struggled with injuries in a way that's, been unfortunate, but some consistency as at pass catcher certainly helps Daniel Jones, and I think we can all expect them to make some more notable move there, but nice to have him. He's been a good player, just hurt, right?
Yeah, and I think he's a second-round pick, so he kind of goes under the radar. He plays more slot, though he can go outside. I think he's an important part of that locker room. He might be at this point like one of the more veteran players, just having played in New York the longest of anyone there. And I think that's valued to an extent. He's never a guy who's, had a down season. He's just had a lot of injuries, and it's unfortunate. Whenever it seems like Sterling Shepard starts playing his best football, he gets hurt. And I don't really know what to say to that other than it's just unlucky. And I think, you got to buy low on this guy because it just the moment, the fans like him too. Like the moment he plays his best football, it's going to be a really good thing for the locker room just because I think there's a lot of people rooting for him over there in New York and just – they need receivers, and this is a guy that at the very least gives them an opportunity to hit more upside of that position group. Again, buying low.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Nick here 100%. He's always been a guy that's been productive when he's been on the field. And I think that I feel really bad for him because going into his career, he was pretty much thrown into like a wide receiver one type role after Odell was gone because they didn't really have anybody else. And I think that he would have been a very good to elite wide receiver two. I think he could be a very good complimentary guy, just like a big-time wide receiver number one. So I felt bad for him because he was kind of thrown into a role that he probably wasn't well-suited for. And he was still productive when he was on the field. So hopefully, they get him in here. They might be able to go get a guy for agency. I've heard some DeAndre Hopkins talk. I've heard some, drafting Quentin Johnson talk, getting a bigger body type guy receiver there. So hopefully he can be healthy and stay on the field, and he can really grow into that role because I think he has something left in the tank, especially if he's only going to be a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 type guy. And I think he can be still very, very productive. So I'm happy for him. It's a guy that I grew up with. We went to a lot of camps together and did a lot of that stuff. We graduated high school the same year. So I'm very familiar with Sterling. So I'm happy to see him still around. And I know that when his career is done playing-wise, he's definitely going to be a guy that they consider bringing on staff. I know they love him. And during his injury period, he's essentially been a wide receiver coach for them. He's been an assistant wide receiver coach, that is. He's been able to help them out a lot, help bring the young guys along. So he's also basically another coach in the room at this point. So it's really good for him on that end because it shows how much they believe in him and how much they respect him and what he's done. And the amount of times he's sacrificed. He's restructured his deal. He signed a pretty lucrative deal a couple of years ago, and he's restructured at every turn. And a lot of guys would have fought him on that and probably tried to keep as much money as possible. But he's taken a pay cut. He restructured 1 year, then took a pay cut the next year. So he's been very cooperative with the team, and I think they appreciate that. And this type of deal shows it. So $1.3 million deal, and then I think there's still like 4.5 in dead money that they would have owed him if they let him go. So he's still going to be in pay. So a good deal for both teams here.
Yep, I agree. I like him, and hopefully he can stay healthy this season. All right, so the Philadelphia Eagles bring back Brandon Graham on a 1-year deal. He's kind of a leader at this point. He's a decent player. He was scheduled to have his contract void this year, if I'm not mistaken. So they signed him to a deal that pushes that void down the line. I think I'd have to look at it, but it's not a huge deal. It's a fairly small contract, and potentially this is them just doing salary cap magic as well. I'd really have to take a look at it. But good leader for them, good locker room guy. He's been around through their most successful season. So bringing him back brings that veteran leadership. The Commanders re-sign David Mayo, and of course, Deron Payne to a 4-year, $90 million contract. So he was on the tag, scheduled to play on the tag. We talked about the potentiality of him being traded. But no, he is back, and they have solidified their interior, so they now have Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne, both making quite a bit of money. 4 years, $90 million means that he's averaging about $22.5 million per year. So I believe that makes him the second most highly paid defensive tackle outside of Aaron Donald, who blows this out of the water by a wide margin. But this also kind of sets the market for everybody who's not Donald. And there are quite a few of those guys who are set to be paid this year. So, Nick, I have to imagine that you're pleased with getting Payne back under contract for an extended period of time for the Commanders.
Just a bit. I mean, it's $60 million in guarantees, so that's decent, I think, for Washington, just trying to manage what they're now paying for, especially just like 2 defensive tackles that they've maxed out here in terms of the market. The Allen deal, it'll be interesting because he's getting paid like significantly less in the market if he's going to be okay with that going forwards. Although I think his guarantees are a much higher percentage of his contract than Payne's are, which might be how they juggle that. I think the way the league is going, Washington kind of initially had drafted Fedarian Mathis, tagged Payne, wasn't expecting maybe to make this extension. Payne has a great year. Defensive line, we're seeing the interior pressure become more prevalent. We're seeing a little bit more of it happening. We're seeing maybe it become a little bit easier to identify, and because of its value, teams are trying to acquire that position more. But the value of the position is growing because of that. Because it's still still difficult enough to find them that it's important to have them. And now they have 2, and I think, your team that goes into the offseason going next year thinking probably not going to bring back both Sweat and Chase Young, going to have to probably draft an edge player. It's become a position that at the top of the draft is a little easier to identify than interior pass rushers. And not only do I think interior pass rushers are valuable, but both of these guys are not just pass rushers. They're 3-down defensive tackles. Like, these guys are playing 70 snaps a game last year. And that's kind of ridiculous. Like, you wouldn't expect that to happen. I think with Mathis healthy and Ridgeway's addition during the season last year, they shouldn't have to play as much, and that'll be good for them. I don't think of this as much as you're paying Deron Payne $22 million. I think you're paying for the combination of Allen and Payne $40 million, which I think, as we talked about in the last show, I don't think Deron Payne is worth $23 million in Los Angeles or Atlanta when he's defensive tackle 1. But I think these 2 guys have played football together for 8 years now, combined between Washington and Alabama. And I think it's there's a value to, again, continuity, as Kyron referred to earlier on the show, and kind of how these guys set each other up. Allen had probably his best career year 2 years ago because of how often Payne was eating space and taking up those double teams. And then this year, when teams that try to adjust to Allen, Payne kind of has his best career season this year. So, you're paying for a unit, you're paying for an identity. And I think it's worth it, even if maybe the analytics crowd is not as thrilled as paying a guy, Deron Payne, this much money.
Yeah, I mean, the thing you have to keep in mind as well is like the market's only going to get crazier here for these guys. Like, so you get them at a pretty decent entry point. It's a little bit crazy now when you look at it. A year from now, 2 years from now, like we don't know what Quentin Williams is about to get. We don't know what Christian Wilkins is about to get down in Miami. Like, there's going to be some crazy deals coming along here. If Aaron Donald's in the game, I mean, another year from now, he could want a crazy re-up. We don't know what's going to happen. So, only thing we know is that the prices are going to keep getting crazier. You have a very, very good interior. You have the best interior in football. I don't think that's a debate. You have the best 1-2 punch at defensive tackle in the NFL. You keep those guys, like you said, the continuity. They've been playing together for almost a decade now. As long as they're healthy, man, they're going to be the best interior duo in the league. And I think it's well worth it over the course of this time period, especially if you're serious about competing. Your defense needs to be exceptional this year because you're going to have a lot of growing pains on offense. You're breaking in a new system. We don't know who's going to be the quarterback going forward. It's just prudent to have a very good to great defense, and I think that's what they're going to have to do. Just take a little bit of page of the Jets book here, like build the defense up as much as possible, and then listen. You swing for the fences on offense, and I think they have a very good skill group. I mean, you look at the skill group. You have Jahan Dotson, Terry McLaurin, Logan Thomas is tight end, and you got is Curtis Samuel still there. I mean, you got two really good running backs in Gibson and Robinson. The offensive line is middle of the row right now. I don't know if they're going to bring Leno back. I don't know what they're doing there, but looking at the team, the makeup of the team,
focus.
Right. The makeup of the team is very, very, very solid across the board. You got a couple key positions that you need to address, but presumably with Eric Bieniemy, the offense is going to take a leap this year. So keeping that in mind, I think this is a very important move because it shows how serious they are about winning and going forward in the future. What they are going to put, they're going to put their eggs in the basket and pay guys. I think he said $60 million guaranteed. How much was the signing bonus? I'm not sure about the particulars of the deal, but
there's $60 million guaranteed. 60 million guaranteed, 55.5, I think, guaranteed at signing. So, you know,
that's
definitely
it shows they're willing to pay. Right. It shows they're paying, they're investing now. And I don't know what's going to happen with the ownership group. I mean, we keep hearing different things about, you know, what's going on with the ownership groups. But if they're willing to pay guys and get cap hits down and get first year caps down, second year caps down, it's going to go a long way in building the rest of the team.
Can I break a news story on the show right now? Because I don't think the national news media knows this. The team is getting sold. Like, it's happening. All right. I don't know why. I've seen multiple times now that I was tweeting about this earlier this week. NFL Network and ESPN analysts go on and be like talking about the Lamar Jackson trade or something and be like, you know, if Dan Snyder might or might not smell, so he might need to like make a move to pitch to keep the team. It's like, no, they're like, this is happening. Like, there's a reason Josh Harris is pairing with Mitchell Rails to like increase his bid. It's like there's 4 people involved. Like they've moved. This was a news story from months ago. They moved all of their personal belongings, Dan and Tanya Sider, out of FedEx Field and out of Ashburn's facility of training. They're gone. Like, I don't know. It annoys me that we're still treating this like it might not happen because some things have to go down. But there might be a lot of news stories in the future. Dan Snyder's legal process probably not going to end immediately, but I'd be very shocked if the sale doesn't happen at the earliest, like at the beginning of September or something. That would be like the crazy scenario where it doesn't happen, you know, quick enough, and they have to like do some legal stuff, and it takes a few more months.
Yeah, I have every expectation that is going to happen as well. But yeah, okay.
Kyron's laughing. He's got me nervous now.
No, it's just funny, man. It's just funny. Like, because I grew up, you know, my uncle played for the Washington. Well, they were the Redskins back then, the Commanders now. So it's just funny, like seeing how this whole process was shaked out because you heard stories back then, but you know, I was young and didn't really understand stuff and didn't really understand the gravity of like what type of stuff was going on. And there was a lot of, I don't know if you guys remember how crazy the Hainsworth deal was at the time. There's a lot of crap that went around the team during that time, and you know, D'Angelo Hall was there, and my uncle was there, and everybody was. It was just a big situation, right? He was paying like 4 or 5 guys really well, just handling situations poorly, and you hear stuff about what goes on in the workplace, and it's just funny seeing all this like come to a head 20 years later almost, and it's just hilarious to see. But hopefully for the Commanders' sake, everything is going to go in a more stable direction because the bones of this team is really good, and windows in the NFL are short. So being able to capitalize while you have all these guys in the building, like presumably within the next year or two, they should be competing for playoff spots. And who knows? We've seen the Rams weren't a great roster top to bottom, make a playoff run and win a Super Bowl. I mean, so it's possible, man. Like that team, that city, that community is starved for football. You see how much they support the DC Defenders and how they're doing in the XFL. Imagine if the Commanders go on a run here and start to get pretty good and they win 11, 12 games this year. The city's starving for something like that. So hopefully with more stable leadership, they can work towards that because they have very good bones on both sides of the ball. And that doesn't happen in the NFL very often.
Yeah, they were one of the blue blood franchises. I mean, I think technically they still are, but it's hard to make the case for it. But I mean, they're one of the most popular teams in the NFL, at least in terms of overall number of fans. If you ask how invested those fans are right now in this minute, I don't know about that. But in terms of numbers, very, very high, big market. But all right. So let's move to the NFC North now. We did already talk about the Bears a little bit. The Minnesota Vikings, they've released a number of players. I think we talked about some of them recently. Adam Thielen's gone. We've lost Eric Kendricks. We've lost Cam Dantzler, who was one of their recent draft picks, but from a prior regime. And there is a very good chance that Harrison Smith is going to be gone. They're still looking at possibly working something out with him, but I think a lot of people do expect him to go. So, just briefly, because we talked about it a little bit, what do you guys think about the direction of this team now? Because we've also heard reports that they're looking at an extension with Kirk Cousins. So, if that's the case, then they're looking to completely rebuild the defense, but kind of keep what they have on offense. Or are they also going to be trading Dalvin Cook? Like, what do we think about where they are right now?
I'll go first on this one. I think they're in a very weird position here because they just came off of a 13-4 season. So the expectations are ridiculously high, and they shouldn't be because the team isn't that great. It's crazy to say about a 13-14 team, but I think they had a negative point differential by the end of the season. Like they were winning games miraculously, and Justin Jefferson was having an incredible season, and Kirk played one of his best years. But the defense isn't very good. The defensive backfield is pretty bad, to be honest. The offensive line is young and decent, but you lost Adam Thielen. You might lose Dalvin Cook. You're going to have to pay Justin Jefferson here. You're probably going to extend Kirk Cousins. There's not a lot of money to go around here either. I'm not 100% sure of the cap situation, but after you pay the guys that you must keep, it's going to get pretty dire for them pretty quick. And with the second-year head coach, I feel like the expectations should be reined back a lot, and I don't think they will be. So coming off of a 13-win season and hosting a home playoff game, the media and the fan base is going to be starved for a repeat of that success, and I just don't see it happening for that team. So obviously there are moves to be made. You're getting guys like Lewis Seen back in the secondary that you're expecting them, be a pretty big contributor for them. So I think that they can be solid again, but replicating what they did last year and improving on that, I don't think is realistic. So I think they're in a very tough spot going forward here because a lot of these moves will dictate how the organization, the front office, and the coaching staff actually view their roster going forward. So if they're extending, important guys and then taking young guys into elsewhere, or they get off some of these contracts and move on for some of these guys and kind of start to look like they're rebuilding, we'll see very quickly here how much they actually believe in this roster going forward.
Yep. Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely going to be more roster changes in terms of like loosening up cap and on the way to go. I think some Vikings fans are a little upset. Like it seems like they're not attacking like a win now window, but I think it's important to kind of, as a front office manager, be able to look at a 13-win season and say, great, we're probably not that consistently and need to not just plan for the future based off of one outcome of a season where, things went correctly, but you can't expect them to always go perfectly, right? And I think they've done that well. And I just because that they're making some changes doesn't mean they can't compete. It doesn't mean they can't compete in 2 years. And I would even argue that, your chances of really, really winning a Super Bowl the next 2 years probably increase when you operate this way because you're probably not one of the main contenders this next upcoming season, and you're really shooting for by either having like win some games this year, and then probably in 2 years you're in a good spot to really shoot for the moon.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Agreed. So I think one of the reasons that fans see that they look at the fact that the Bears need a lot of work.
It's
Right. We
immediacy.
talked about it. Right. There's an immediacy, and the Packers taking a step back. They already took a step back. They're moving on from Aaron Rodgers in all likelihood, and the Lions, they showed a lot of promise, but again, they're not quite there yet, right? They didn't make the playoffs, so I think Vikings fans see this as an opportunity, but still, you have to be cognizant of your future and what things look like over multiple years. So I think this is a good decision by them, or a slew of good decisions. And then maybe hold off on extending Cousins unless it's really just about maybe adding void years to try and bring cap hit down potentially, because I still think that you just need to be, patient with that, because you can always upgrade. And right now he's better than probably mostly what's available, but doesn't mean you need to lock yourself in additionally. Okay, a few more smaller moves. We have the Falcons. They are re-signing edge Lorenzo Carter to a 2-year deal, which to me is really just building in a little bit of depth, as they are more than likely going to be prioritizing edge high in the draft. Now, maybe it doesn't fall that way and they don't, but there are a fair number of players who are probably worthy of that selection. So if they aren't going to be looking to, reset at quarterback, then that seems like the smart way to go for them, because it's definitely something that they need. Just to save time, we're going to run through a few more here in the NFC South. The Saints tight end Juwan Johnson is signed to a 2-year, $12 million contract extension. So a nice little deal for him. They needed some tight end help there as well. I know that they liked Adam Troutman, but Juwan Johnson comes back and adds some consistency. Defensive end Tano Passignon signs a 2-year, $6 million extension as well. Another guy who was a role player for them. They need some help there because I believe they have a fair number of free agents coming up. I think their former first-round pick, Davenport, set to be a free agent, if I'm not mistaken. Cam Jordan's getting a little bit older, and their more recent first-round pick at edge just hasn't really, shown that much. So this is a nice player that they get back under contract. And then defensive back JT Gray is coming back for 3 years, $9.6 million. So the Saints are kind of, they're bringing in that depth. They're kind of filling out their roster. They're not going to be particularly active in free agency, I'd have to imagine. I know that they always try and get in on a guy here or there, but this kind of gets them set at the majority of positions. I mean, you look across the roster, and I'm not sure that there are any gaping holes at this point. Their depth is pretty solid, and so really they're just going to have to rely on older players still being productive, guys not getting hurt, and Derek Carr having a good year if they want to be competitive in the playoffs. But Nick, real quick, what do you think about this set of signings?
Yeah, Passignon has shown some good stuff in the past couple of years, and I think that it was a good thing for them to get him in there. They need more edge depth. Uncertain if Davenport's really going to be in the cards for an extension, considering their money situation, and they need guys to start because of their money situation. So he's a guy who can play at the very least. And then Juwan Johnson's done some nice things as well, with not the best quarterback play at times. So they gotta fill out a roster still, despite all the guys they're paying, and they don't have a ton of draft picks, but they did add some considering the trade with Sean Payton. But they just need to find guys that are cost efficient, because they don't have the money.
Yeah, agreed. I just got a text about the Aaron Rodgers news should be breaking pretty soon here. That's what I was just told. So I've been texting about that. I'm kind of interested to see, but. I think the Saints are in a good spot. The Saints are in a good spot here, though. I think the Saints, if you get a guy like that back with his production, I don't think people are taking the Saints seriously enough here. And I'm going out on a limb here, but I think they're going to win 11, 12 games next year. I think they're going to be really, really good. The defense is top 5 to 6, 7 in the league. I think they'll be even better now that the offense is going to presumably be more stable and consistent. You get Trevor Penny back on the offensive line. We don't know what they're going to have at running back. We don't know Alvin Kamara's situation, but this running back draft is so deep and so rich. I think they'll be able to get a solid contributor in round 3 or 4 if they want. Think about a guy like Tajay Spears being able to stay in the New Orleans area and go to play for the Saints and be in that backfield, and what he could do catching the ball out of the backfield and just versatility. A guy like Tank Bigsby or Zach Charbonnet in the 3rd round that could presumably still be there. There's plenty of guys that they could take and kind of refill. Not Alvin Kamara's void, but be palatable, be productive, be good enough. And I think the skill group is, as long as they're healthy, they're going to be fine. I mean, Michael Thomas is coming back. Jarvis Landry will be back. We don't know what they're going to have as far as speed breaking here soon, but I think they'll be plenty productive on offense going forward. And I think they're going to be a very, very solid team this year. So little moves like these are going to give them depth and assurances that they can, be more reliable and consistent this year. So I'm really excited about the Saints going forward.
Yeah. I mean, I think long term there are some potential questions, but obviously we kind of we've known that about them for a while. So this does solidify their outlook in 2023, which is apparently for the Saints the only thing that ever matters. So, but yeah, I mean, I do expect them to be the best team in the NFC South. I think it's hard to look at that division and not see that. So, all right. So last thing. Sean Gibson re-signing on a 1-year deal with the 49ers. Nick just pushing my buttons here with tweeting about Aaron Rodgers. All right, so we are going to talk about the AFC East now. I don't know when the news is going to break for Aaron Rodgers, but I suppose
I have it set up so that the Jets should probably be last.
Yeah, I suggest we do that, and then if the news breaks, then we can slot them in wherever that happens.
All right.
So let's start with the Buffalo Bills, the team that most recently won the division. The Buffalo Bills are a team that is going to lose a little bit in terms of overall talent, right? We've talked potentially about them losing their left tackle if they decide to move on. They are probably going to be losing Tremaine Edmonds just to free agency. Micah Hyde. I believe Micah Hyde is still technically under contract, if I'm not mistaken. Poyer's set to be a free agent. He's been looking for a new deal. Didn't happen. There were some tweets, I believe, from Jordan Poyer's wife, girlfriend, I'm not sure which one, that implied that it's not fully off the table yet for them to come back. So we'll see, but they'll need to make some moves to kind of revamp after some of their more expensive and aging veterans are potentially out the door. We also could probably use a little bit more at wide receiver. Khalil Shakir is a nice player who came on some as a rookie, so you'd like to see him step forward again. But there were definitely times where if Stephon Diggs wasn't doing anything, or was having a hard time taking over the game, that there was some left wanting at that position. So there are a fair number of places that they've got to look at. But the reality is that it is still overall very good roster. Josh Allen may be inconsistent. He may put the ball in harm's way, but he's still one of the best in the NFL. There's really no two ways about that. They don't have cap space right now. There's no doubt that what their listed cap space is going to be altered or finalized within the next 24 hours before free agency. And so there's no risk of them being over the cap, but they're also not going to have a ton of flexibility. So when you look at what their needs are and what their available assets are, Nick, what do you see in this team?
I see a team that was really well built last year in terms of depth and every position set up to succeed. It didn't work out for them. They had some injuries at key positions, and now they're going to be in the spot losing some guys where they kind of need to fill in a little bit just to kind of recapture a little bit of that. And it sucks because I think last year for them was really they had assembled the roster that was about as good as they were going to get. Not that doesn't mean they
we got a breaking one here.
We got a breaking one here.
This could have big implications for the other guy here. So the Patriots are trading Jonnu Smith to the Falcons.
Okay.
Which is interesting because Kyle Pitts, I mean, there might be some movement here with Kyle Pitts here, which would be interesting. This would be very interesting. This could be a domino because wow. Yeah, this is what interesting one to me because I think people are not really reading the writing on the wall here. I mean it's a cool move here for the Patriots. They dump some money, they get a little bit of money to work with. But why do you need Jonnu Smith and Kyle Pitts? It leads me to believe they may be moving on from Kyle Pitts here, which in my opinion would be the best thing for
on the move. To team wise or position wise, you moving out to X maybe?
But they already have an X.
Well, he can play Z.
But no, he could play. I think he could play receiver. I mean, he is the receiver. Let's be honest about that.
He's got like measurables.
That's what I've always said.
But a very, very interesting move here because it's not a move. This is not a very Patriot-like thing. Normally, they see these deals out. Even if they hit, they don't hit. They normally see these deals out and then move on when they're able to. They're going to
draft Darnell Washington. They're going to draft Darnell Washington. I'm telling you right now.
I'm excited here because the dominoes are starting to fall. We're getting closer to the hour here. We're starting to see stuff move. Very interesting move because this is not a very Patriot-like thing. So, like you said, either they're very high on somebody in the draft that they think is going to be there, and they're dumping the money, or this is just a money dump and they're moving on and kind of. Will we ever see them rebuild, essentially? I mean, this could be the first step in maybe a rebuilding year for the Patriots.
Maybe. I think they paid too much money for tight ends, and Jonnu Smith wasn't good enough, and I think that's why they're moving on. I think this says more about Atlanta. I think you're right, and I think, this is Arthur Smith's Tennessee system that made Jonnu Smith and got him paid by New England where he didn't really fit in, and I think that he's going to be great in the role that they've been using Kyle Pitts as. They've tried to make him Jonnu Smith in that offense, and it just doesn't work because he's not the same player. Smith is going to probably produce well in this Falcons offense. I'm buying low on him in fantasy this year probably now. But, I think it's interesting to see what happens with Pitts. He just shouldn't be playing in the role he is playing in. And either this is going to force him into a separate role or, as Kyron is suggesting, maybe onto a different team. So that's good for Pitts. It's good for Smith.
If this regime spent the 4th overall pick on Kyle Pitts and then move on after 2 seasons of not really knowing how to use him, that is damning. And I've always been a little bit questionable about that for them, but
it is because you miss obviously. But I think there's something to be said for cutting your losses before it's year 4 and he has no value whatsoever. If there was a time to cut your losses from a guy like this is the time to just bite in and say, we screwed up, we made the wrong pick. We're not very good. We missed on. I'm not gonna say you're not very good because you hit on.
We're not very good at this.
But you hit on a guy like Tyler Algier that I was very high on. I was very high on Tyler Algier coming out of BYU. He had like 20-something touchdowns and nobody talked about the kid. And I was like, why is nobody talking about this guy? And they got a guy like him in the 5th round, and he ended up running for over 1,000 yards. So they have proven that they're they drafted AJ Terrell. They have proven that they're competent, but that was a reach for pick in any capacity. And cutting your losses here, it sucks. It hurts, it stings. But I think if you were going to do it, this is the time to move on.
Yeah, nobody talked about Algier because he didn't blaze a 40. That's why.
Maybe
that's really the only reason.
I don't want to use it, but maybe this is some. They said they're not in the Lamar Jackson sweepstakes, but I know a team that loves tight ends and would love to use a guy like that versatility wise and move him around a lot. So the Ravens, they just hired Todd Monken too. So if there's ever a guy that could use a Mark Andrews and a Kyle Pitts together, it's a guy like Todd Monken.
And Isaiah Likely, just all tight ends. I love it. Hey man, I love it. Wow, 7th round pick too. Sounds like that's a contract dump to me a little bit. So yeah, but I wouldn't be shocked. Yeah, dominoes falling. All right, are we gonna go back to the Bills really quick and then maybe finish with the Patriots here and just we're gonna be all over a little bit, aren't we? I don't even know what we were talking about with the Bills. They need to fill in roster spots. How healthy is Von Miller was the question I put for them because I think it really. They kind of look, I think Buffalo's still the best team in the AFC East, and I think they're Super Bowl contenders. I don't think they're better than Kansas City going into this season. I don't think that maybe even Cincinnati's probably on their level. I think teams like Miami could very well be on their level. Maybe the Jets if they get Aaron Rodgers. In fact, the Jets could be very scary if they get Aaron Rodgers here. But I don't know that Buffalo's ceiling is the same without Von Miller, and we kind of saw that last season. We were talking about all the statistics and how sites like Football Outsiders were like Buffalo's the best team going to the Super Bowl. And, one thing I didn't really talk about when we were having that discussion before the playoffs is like, if you take the first month, maybe first 6 weeks of football out, and then Buffalo drops like a good amount, right? They played amazing football the first month when Vaughn was healthy, and they kind of had some things going for them. They weren't relying on Josh Allen as much. They had less injuries at receiver as well. So they kind of are a little bit reliant on some of these high-end players like anyone, succeeding. And I think that they're sinking so much money into Von Miller. They really have invested on this D-line. They kind of need the high-end push that he gives them. It won't really be the same outlook for them if he's not the same guy coming off of an ACL injury at age, 30 something.
34. Yeah, I think he's 34 now. But like you said, still as productive as any edge rusher in football. I think he did a lot for them because they're a team that doesn't like to blitz a lot. Leslie Frazier and those guys, they don't like to dial up a ton of blitzes or complex pressures or simulated pressures. And he gave them the ability to just line up with 4 down and go get the quarterback. And when you're able to do that, especially with that back end and those linebackers, giving them the ability to just, running around, dropping the zones, not have to necessarily worry about covering guys for 3 to 4 or 5 seconds, it does wonders for your defense. So after he was out, they had a little bit of trouble rushing the passer and getting those pressures on guys. I mean, you look at the game against the Chiefs where they went to Arrowhead. Von Miller took over that football game. That last 2 series of the game, he had a sack, he had a forced fumble, he drew a holding, and then he drew the pressure that Patrick Mahomes threw the interception on to end the game. Those type of things you lost when you lost Von Miller. They could have used a guy like that against Cincinnati in the playoffs when they couldn't get a lick of pressure on Joe Burrow. They could have used a guy like that during the season when they were struggling against teams like the Dolphins, even though they came out and won that game in the end. Skylar Thompson, threw for 200 plus yards, 2 touchdowns. They were getting a lot of vertical stuff down the field, and that's mainly due. I won't say mainly. That's partly due to the lack of pass rush they were able to get. You were hoping a guy like an Ed Oliver could give you a little bit more on the inside, but it's hard for an undersized guy like that to consistently get after the pass rusher. And if you're relying on an interior guy to be your pass rusher, probably not going to work out very good for you. So I think they really need a guy opposite Von Miller. Russo I'm not as high on Russo as a lot of people. I want to know you guys thought about Russo because I think he's good. I don't think he's the guy. Obviously, he's not the guy that you can count on if Von Miller goes down. So what do they do with a guy like Russo? Because after this year, you got to come to a decision if you're going to pay the guy, let him walk, trade him. What are you going to do? So should they maybe go edge in this draft?
I think they will draft in their edge player slot probably at some point, or interior. I mean, I had interior listed because they really – I mean, Ed Oliver, I don't think is a guy that you're like dumping a ton of money into. They could bring him back, but I think somebody else is leaving, and they just don't really have like a top-end interior player that's really good. And if there's somebody at that pick, they could in the first round, they very well could go that direction. Kalijah Kancey doesn't really fit their mold, but Adebaware really is like the type of edge player they go for, like kind of these like hybrid types, maybe a Carl Brooks type. It's the right draft for the Bills to just continue to try and add to that position group. So I don't think they'd be wrong to continue to look at that position group for sure. I mean, it's just that's how they win the Super Bowl, right? Like they need to like hit on a position group that's just way better than Kansas City did with their O-line, Cincy did it with their receiving core. Like they need a position group that just like exceeds expectations, even though we know it's good. It's like elite, right? It's not going to be their O-line. The receiving core's decent, but I don't even think like it's worth it for them to try and like add another really great player there just because they're good there, and I don't think they're going to be amazing. They're going to be really good. And in the corner, corner's a hard position group to really nail down in that way. And White's had some injuries. Like it's like this is the position group they can do it with, and so they have to. Yeah,
I mean, DeMar Hamlin was their elite tackler. Like they have some secondary issues that not many people are talking about here. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do on that back end as well, because Micah Hyde, he'll be back, but is he going to be back at the level he was before injury? Is he going to look the same without, presumably without Jordan Poyer next to him? I think those guys bounced off of each other very well. They played very well together. I don't think either one of them is good without the other on the field. So they have some secondary issues that are not being addressed here too. I still think they're the best team in the AFC East, like Nick said, because they have Josh Allen, because they have Stephon Diggs, because they're very talented in other areas. But I think the gap's shrinking, and I think it's shrinking rapidly. Even if you look at the matchups with the Dolphins this year, they split the regular season matchup, and both those games came down to the wire, and then the playoff matchup came right down to the wire with a third-string quarterback. So it's interesting to see the gap in the division, because Buffalo's success has been a lot outside of the division. They've won the division, I think, 3 or 4 years in a row, but slowly but surely, every year is getting a lot more competitive. The Jets games were very competitive. The Patriots games are always very competitive. So it's going to be interesting to see the moves that they make, because they're pretty much handicapped handicap with money here, and they don't have a ton of picks. So it's going to be interesting to see if they make a trade here. They dump a contract. Maybe a guy like Ed Oliver isn't going to be around. We don't know. So it'll be interesting to see how they move going forward, because they have some adjustments that they need to make, and they need to make them now because the division's only getting better.
Yeah. I mean, they're going to have to fight tooth and claw to stay at the top of this division now, I think, and we'll see over the next hour or so if that becomes notably more challenging, or if they are still clearly ahead of the Jets and then just have to contend with the Dolphins, who have been making moves. So we shall see. So let's go ahead and move on to the Miami Dolphins, I suppose would be the next one. The Dolphins, they need probably more offensive line help, because Teron Armstead, we know he's good. There's no question about that. We know he's aging, and we know he has injury troubles. So he'll be there, but they should probably work on solidifying maybe his heir apparent. They could use some help elsewhere on the line as well. Tight end now, too, is probably something that they could use some help with.
Darnell. Please,
Kyle
Darnell.
You want Darnell? Dude, I love Darnell, man. He's special. I've spent probably too much time this early in the process talking about Darnell Washington, though. So I'll let you talk about it if you want to. They could use linebacker help. You mentioned that. They could probably use some defensive line interior help potentially, but really like pretty far down the line. Their wideout, great. Running back, they made a trade that really helped them out last year. I think they need some assurances at the quarterback position. They could really, really use somebody that can come in and be a viable option if Tua does get hurt again, which you don't even really want to talk about, but you just got to be honest with yourself as far as that goes. So we shall see. Yeah, I mean, Nick, I'll let you talk about it for a minute, but I think we should give the floor to Kyron. This is his team after all, and he knows it better than anybody.
Yeah, so I wanted to list quarterback as like the third need, and then I was like, I don't want to do that to Kyron, so I'm going to write backup quarterback.
Quarterback is the number 2 need for
number
me.
2 need.
I think
all right.
It's more than fair to say, because I think the roster is so solid top to bottom. We saw this year, if you had a solid backup quarterback, and I think we all thought Teddy Bridgewater. Yeah, we thought Teddy Bridgewater was going to be the guy, and he wasn't bad when he played. He kept them in games. He moved the chains. He didn't turn the ball over, but Teddy got hurt. So, and he's older. You're not going to pay him another $10 million this year to be the backup quarterback. So, quarterback is very high on the list. It's totally fair to say that.
Mm-hmm. And I typed out backup quarterback actually, and was like, that looks weird. I'm just going to put it as the main. I just put it as the question. I just said they need to get a backup quarterback. I think that I've talked about Garoppolo on the show for them. I think that makes sense. But I think if you're going to go draft, like, obviously I had McKee a little higher on my board, but Hendon Hooker, like, if there's a spot for him to end up, like, this is the one. This is like the most similar to what he had in college, and that he's just going to have speed on the outside, the ability to kind of like spread the field out, maybe run some read option like they're already doing, and hit those guys on go routes. Like, I think they need to find somebody with some upside at the quarterback position that they can stick in a pinch and just see if they can find a spark if something goes wrong with Tua, because this is way too talented of a team for that to be the reason that it gets derailed.
Yeah, I mean, a name that nobody wants to talk about, but it's going to be a viable name here. Stetson Bennett, 5th round. I mean, listen, I don't love the guy here, but he makes perfect sense in a West Coast style offense like this. Get the ball out fast. A lot of quick reads, a lot of intermediate throws, and he has a very decent deep ball. I mean, when you talk about going vertical, he stretched the field at Georgia. He had superior talent, of course, but he's a guy that, unlike Tua, he is much more inclined to take off and run the football as well. I think he won't be in as many situations where he's gonna get hit, because the offensive line is not great. You're not going to be able to spend a ton of money fixing the offensive line. You're going to probably draft a guy, maybe I first an Austin Jackson trade rumblings here. Maybe you can trade a guy like Austin Jackson and get something in return. Who knows? But he's a guy that could use his legs a lot more. And I love Hendon Hooker as well. But I think being more mobile at the quarterback position should be a key factor here as well. Jimmy G is another viable option. I love Jimmy G. OVC guy, been in the West Coast offense. I mean, obviously, a ton of familiarity with Mike McDaniel. But I think being a little bit more mobile at the quarterback position is going to help tremendously, because I think it's going to help the run game out as well. Having a decent, to good threat to run the ball at quarterback helps the run game. It takes a little bit of pressure off those running backs. So that would be a big deal for me. I would love for them to be able to get a guy that's a little bit more mobile to back up Tua in case he gets hurt. But obviously the organization fully believes in Tua. They picked up his 5th-year option already. They pretty much said this is going to be our guy for the next 2 years minimum. Who knows? He could he plays well, he get a pretty big contract extension here soon. But I think the team is in a great spot going forward. You don't have a ton of picks, but you have a little bit of money now. Ross is showing that he's going to pay the money now. He's investing in guys. He's showing that, hey, I believe in this team. This is our window to go on a run. So it's pretty much on Tua to stay healthy, the offensive line to get better, because I think the defense is going to make a pretty big leap here this year. If they can stay healthy, they're going to be pretty consistent getting after the quarterback. And I think they were really good at taking the ball away this year. If they continue that success taking the ball away, and Tua can stay healthy and continue to protect the ball like he has, they're going to be in every game they play this year. And especially in this division, there's very little margin for error. So I think the Dolphins are in a good spot, but I think backup quarterback is one of the biggest pressing needs. I think offensive line is number one. Backup quarterback is firmly in number two, because you can't risk the future of the franchise if Tua was to get injured here. And there's no leeway here. There's not going to be a situation like last year where he gets a concussion and then you're throwing him back out there in 2 weeks. And then he gets another concussion and you're throwing him back out there in 3 weeks. No, if he gets another concussion, we're talking about potential retirement here. We're talking about the future of the franchise looking vastly different than it does right now. So backup quarterback is a pressing need.
Yep.
Yeah, so just want to throw this out there real quick. First of all, this is a hilarious YouTube thing. Need a lot more Saturday football. I agree. My wife definitely does not. Pro football, yeah. So what do you think Ed Oliver could fetch in a trade? He is kind of small, right? He's not, big time plugger. But just super quick question. What do we think about that? What we think, maybe 3rd round pick?
I think you wouldn't go that high. I think the teams are starved for interior pass rushers. And I think Ed Oliver is probably, if Don Payne's in like the 12 to 16 range of defensive tackles in the NFL, Oliver's probably in like a tier after that. And he's a good player. Like, he's going to get some money on the market, probably in like the, with the range you just saw, maybe a little more than what Roy Robertson Harris has gotten. I think he's a better player than Robertson Harris. Just I don't think he's going to be in that top of the market type range, but maybe he will be. I don't know who his agent is. Some of these guys just figure this stuff out, but teams are starving for it. And look, the guy had a really good year 2 years ago. He wasn't as good this year, but he's shown the ability to play like really high level football at that position group. And I think this is a position that like we've seen kind of teams go out of their way to try and find receivers in an offseason. This is the offseason where teams are going to pay a lot for defensive tackle, but that's going to affect lower levels too, where teams are going to be like trading up in the draft for defensive tackles. And they're going to be, paying some of these lower level guys more than you would expect as well. And it's just, there's going to be a blitz to find these guys. And Oliver, if the Bills are trying to move off of him, I think they get more than you'd expect probably.
Yeah. I think 3rd round pick is viable.
Washington was saying they were going to get late second for Payne last year if they wanted to trade him. And I think it would have been late first this offseason if they tried.
The thing I'd be interested in if somebody is offering him some money is if it's a 1 year, 2 year deal. I think that's much more viable for a guy like Ed Oliver. Kind of like, he's a good player. He's solid. Maybe on a contender that needs some guys. I look at a Kansas City Chiefs with a lot of money and a lot of flexibility to move around. They could use another interior pass rusher opposite Chris Jones. I could see them in some playing some 2-3 tech type sets on 3rd down and really getting after it, rushing the passer. Maybe a 49ers. I don't know their cap situation they can move, but they could definitely use another interior guy rushing the passer, especially if a guy like Eric Armstead is not going to be around. So it'd be interesting to see. Even a team like the Colts, who I've heard a lot of Defoe talk, a lot of DeForest Buckner talk about potentially moving on from a guy like that, which I think is kind of crazy. But if you can get a decent haul for a DeForest Buckner type player, maybe a guy like Ed Oliver could be not a replacement for a guy like that, but a guy that you could trust to be viable in that situation. So it depends on the team that's going after him. If he's going to a team that's a contender that wants to, probably make a splash here, make a move that could potentially put them over the edge, I think a 1 year, 2 year type deal where he gets a lot of upfront money, a lot of loaded money, and it's not going to be a big cap hit, could be a very viable situation for an Ed Oliver. And I also think that there's a situation where he could be right back in Buffalo. We do not know, but he's a good player. I think that he's going to, like you said, there's a market for interior guys, especially guys that get after the passer. And I think playing opposite another very good defensive tackle is paramount for a guy like Ed Oliver. He shouldn't be the guy that you're counting on to really hold it down there, especially, in the early downs. If you have another guy, I keep going back to the Chiefs, but a Chris Jones type guy opposite him, you can make a lot of headway here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think teams are starved for depth and pass rush ability at the interior, and he's not really particularly good at stuffing the run, so it does make him a little bit limited, but he has value, and I think, a third-round pick is probably reasonable considering where he is right now entering his fifth-year option year. He's not that inexpensive. If he was still in his true rookie contract, probably get a little bit more for him. That's what I'd guess. We appreciate the questions. We know there's some more Bills stuff that you're asking about, but we've got to move on to some of the other AFC East teams here so we don't run out of time. Now, we talked about the
I'm sorry to cut you, Max. We just got another Schefter bomb here. The Texans and the Raiders are the two teams that are. It's just been Schefter just tweeted this out.
Jets too,
Texans and the Raiders for Jimmy Garoppolo here that are going to be really going after him hard. Which I think the Raiders move makes a ton of sense. But it's very interesting to hear the Texans talk because they're presumably going to draft the guy here. Bryce is the pick from what I've heard. He's the guy. So whether the Texans end up, getting dummied and bullied into a trade up to number 1 to take him, or whether they stay put at number 2, Bryce is the guy I've heard for Texans. So the Texans news is very interesting. The Raiders make a lot more sense. Presumably the Jets too, if they whiff on Aaron Rodgers. So it's very interesting to see the Texans being the name that's been put out there. It could be smoke and mirrors. We know how this goes. People get fed information for reasons, right? But if that is the case, it's going to be very interesting to see what the Texans do going forward.
Interesting. Seahawks are planning to release Shelby Harris too, which is kind of crazy to me. But time to talk about that more later in the week. Again, Raiders, it makes all the sense. The Texans, they probably just want a veteran guy to back up the younger player as opposed to another younger player, right? It kind of makes a difference, I think, who you've got in that backup chair. I think you have this young player who's still trying to prove that he wants to start. He might not necessarily be helping. He doesn't have the same kind of experience that Jimmy Garoppolo has. Garoppolo can be that extra voice coming from McDaniels because not only does he have experience as a player, he's got experience under this coaching staff and back in New England. So it does make a lot of sense. The Jets too. The Jets. He's the obvious move if Rodgers is doing whatever aside from going to the Jets. Then Garoppolo, the Jets have to make a push to get him, honestly, because they have experience with him, being from San Francisco. But to not get Carr, if they don't get Rodgers, they've got to ensure that, because otherwise it's basically an unmitigated disaster in New York. And I hate to be dramatic, but that's true. We'll talk about the Jets in a minute.
No, it is true for sure. That roster's too good for the quarterback to be the only man. That's the only hang-up they had. But quick before we get back into these guys, just got a text about Draymond Jones to the Browns is pretty that's what they're working towards is what I heard. I heard a lot of stuff about Javon Hargrave, but you could presumably get Draymond for, I'll say, significantly cheaper. It's going to be a significant deal, but a lot cheaper than a guy like Javon Hargrave with similar production, in my opinion. So that'll be a really big move for the Browns to get a guy like that, and we still have Myles Garrett on the outside. So that'll be a big move for that team if that were to go down.
Yeah, I just see that Jeremy Fowler dropped that the Falcons and Chris Lindstrom have reached agreement on a contract extension. Apparently very big, not seeing any numbers on that yet, but probably either at or at near the top of the market, if not resetting it above potentially Quentin Nelson. So that's big news for them as well. It made a lot of sense. I think a lot of people saw that coming and expected that, whether it was today or not sure.
Right.
So let's get back to the Dolphins quick here, because it's going to turn into like a 3-hour show real fast. Another question, who's Miami's third best cornerback? So you kind of mentioned it earlier, but if you want to extrapolate on that slightly, because we've already kind of talked about the question at quarterback. So I think we can close out on this as the Dolphins talk, because, this third corner is going to have to be big. Otherwise, that's really the only place that teams are going to be able to target. And if this player does play well, that's, about as close to a lockdown secondary as you can hope for in the NFL these days. So if you want to close out on the corner group, then I think we can move on to the Patriots. Kyron, what do you think?
Cater K, who's a rookie last year, a little bit undersized, but he played as well as any cornerback in the NFL, in my opinion. I think he had a fringe Pro Bowl type year. If he was a more notable name, I know guys like Sauce Gardner and Tariq Woolen got a lot of the hype, and justifiably so. They played very good football. But K, who took on a lot of the tough matchup last year, he didn't just survive. He excelled. He was a very good cornerback. And I think he was the best corner for the Dolphins last year. I mean, even Xavier Howard has said as much. He didn't think he should have made a Pro Bowl. Xavier Howard was very candid about that, which I respected. He said he didn't have as successful of a year as he would have hoped. And K. Deere was the guy that they really leaned on in that secondary. They moved him around a lot, put him on a lot of number ones. And I think he's going to be a very, very viable asset, especially on his deal. The fact that you're able to get Xavier Howard on one side, Jalen Ramsey on the other side, and you can move a guy like K. Deere around, it's going to be very, very tough for teams to attack the Dolphins vertically if the pass rush holds up and Jalen Phillips takes another leap. And you get guys like that, and you have Christian Wilkins on the inside, who's a very good interior pass rusher for defensive linemen. So, K, who is the guy? I'm sure there's some cut-ups on YouTube or something. Google him, YouTube him, and kind of watch some of the stuff he did this year, and you'll come away pretty surprised with how good he was. And he's going to be a guy that the Dolphins are leaning on to be consistent. And if he's consistent, that's going to be possibly the best secondary in football next year.
Certainly could be, and we know that Vic Fangio's had some experience coaching the best secondaries in football at times. So I'm curious to see what he does with that conglomerate of players, because he may have some interesting thoughts. I mean, there's definitely a reason they went after Ramsey, aside from just that the price tag wasn't too high. Nick, do you have anything else that you want to mention about the Dolphins before we move on?
No, Kohu's good. We should probably get to the Patriots so that we have time here, because we got all these breaking news stories popping up too.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Lindstrom details just dropped.
Yeah.
5-year, $105 million. So I'm sure when the details comes out, he'll be the highest paid offensive guard ever. So that's going to be a huge news story. Reset the guard market for sure. $105 million contract is pretty insane.
That's insane. That might be the next market to really blow up, especially if we're talking about how interior D-line is going in the direction it is. What's the adjustment? Interior offensive line. So that might be a couple of years down the road, but I wouldn't be shocked. All right,
not
Patriots.
Sure who else is in line to blow it up, but yeah, that does set the market.
Teams are going to start drafting more of them, which is why eventually, right? So,
Zach Martin
or just teams are going to be searching for them, so they'll start paying guys more. But the Patriots, every position group is I don't even want to call it their roster is so strange. They have a lot of veterans who are fine, and they kind of get the most out of, and then they just. They could upgrade almost everywhere, in my opinion. They probably have more holes at these specific positions that I've listed, but just my question for them is how far can defensive coaching get you? Because that's their strength right now, is how good they are at coaching on the defensive side of the football. But we've seen when you want to maximize roster, if it's going to be defense, it has to be raw talent. On offense, you can get away with coaching or talent, but it's just they're strangely this team that relies on the ceiling of their scheme on defense to get where they need to go. And it just, I don't know without Tom Brady that their ceiling is higher than a 10-win football team. And look, they're probably not going to do any worse than 7 wins, which is nice, but I don't know. I don't know how they maximize this roster with that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure either. I mean, go ahead, Kyron.
No, I was just saying I 100% agree with him. We've never seen the Patriots in pure rebuilding mode because the roster's always been so solid top to bottom. But there are a lot of improvements that you can make. I mean, is Mac Jones the guy? I've heard some rumblings about Mac Jones and their situation with him. If quarterback is the question going forward, you can see some pretty big shakeups in that room in the future here. And it's not a very appealing place for free agents to go. You don't really see a ton of free agents clamoring to go play for the New England Patriots. I mean, it's a very militant-run organization, and it's paid dividends over the course of history. They've always been in the hunt. I mean, they made the playoffs last year. They were in a win-and-in situation this year. They're a very, very solid team top to bottom, and they'll be very solid next year. But they could make some adjustments, and I think, like Nick said, 10 wins, maybe 11 wins peak. It's very valuable for a team like this, even with the subpar offensive play. So if they can make some adjustments on the offensive side of the ball, the ceiling with the defense, we've seen what it is. It's a top 10 perennial defense. They're going to be very good. So it's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out here for them because, like I said, there's no room for error in this division, especially with the moves that the Jets are going to make. Even if only Jimmy Garoppolo is the quarterback for the Jets, you got to think the floor for that team is 10 wins. I mean, they're going to be very good. So it'd be interesting to see the moves they're making. I've heard also some rumblings. We don't know how much longer Bill Belichick is going to be around. So a lot of the moves they make going forward are going to really, show us how serious they are about rebuilding towards the future and potentially create a situation for Coach to inherit a better situation than they're in right now. So it'll be interesting to see how they make moves here.
Yeah, I mean, they're a team in flux, or they're an organization in flux. It just seems like they haven't decided to go all in on the end of Belichick's career necessarily. He also seems like the kind of guy who just might be there forever, right? Like we've heard, varying reports. Yeah, maybe he's ready to pass things on to, to whoever. For a long time, it was assumed McDaniels was the next guy, and now who knows? Or maybe he'll just coach for 10 more years. Would that really, truly shock anybody? Because I'm not sure, how easy it would be for him to put down, the Patriots, it really does depend on what they can do defensively, because their offense right now is built off of some good offensive linemen, some good running backs. They lack receivers, and they also lack tight ends right now. So they need skill players who can catch the ball. Mac Jones has shown the ability to get the ball where it needs to go, usually when he's given time and has a viable run game to work off of. They just keep letting guys go in free agency. Like this year, it looks like Jonathan Jones is the next corner who's going to be good for them and then just move on somewhere else. So you assume that they've got somewhere someone in the pipeline, whether it's a draft pick or not, who knows? I mean, this is a tough team to really dissect because they're the Patriots. All right. And for a long time, their identity was Brady and Belichick, and now it's just Belichick. So what can you really say aside from that?
I don't have a ton to say about that. I mean, look, the Patriots are the Patriots. The floor is so high with this team. I think the lowest amount of games they won in the last 18 years is 7 games, which is crazy when you think about that level of success. They're akin to the Spurs in basketball to me. Like when the Spurs won 50 games, 20 seasons in a row was unheard of. It's kind of in the same boat here with Bill Belichick and the Patriots. We expect so much of them, and they're always going to be so respected in terms of what they can do with roster talent and kind of doing the most with the least. But we've seen them kind of swing for the fences here in the last couple of years. I mean, the Jonnu Smith signing was unprecedented for them. I think Judon got extended last year, but he got a lot of money. We haven't been used to seeing them paying guys a lot of money, and they've kind of been doing that a little bit here. But a guy like Kyle Duggar, they're going to have to pay a guy like him pretty soon. Like they're in a very transitional phase here, and I think that they're going to be still solid enough to where they're never going to be a top 10 drafting team. Like they're always going to be good enough to be in that middle of the field range, but that's not good enough for the Patriots. So the moves they make here is going to be interesting here.
I think it's interesting you bring up the Mac Jones thing, just because that was what they had in the past to really put him over the top, was Tom Brady, right? Like they have this amazing pocket passer that just no one else can replicate. And it's not really a thing that's in the league anymore. You don't have these like immobile pocket passers outside of Brady, right? I guess Matt Stafford's the closest thing. But even then, we've kind of moved away from that. Immediately after that, Cam Newton goes there. And for like a month, like the Cam Newton thing looked really good. And it kind of fell apart as it got beat up a little bit and teams started figuring out schematically what to do, which is why in a couple weeks or maybe a week ago when we were talking about Lamar Jackson, like I quietly loved this landing spot for him just because I think if you're going to play this style of football and really lean on that defensive coaching, having a quarterback that can kind of bring this run-first approach really, really fits. And I think that's the direction they need to go in. I think at times they had even thought that would be the direction they would go in. I just think that they ended up with Mac Jones and decided to kind of sit with him. And I don't know. Quarterback is a really interesting question mark for them over not just off season, but the next one, because I think I don't dislike Mac Jones. I just think they really have built this team for years now with a reliance on high level play from that position, which is tough because, it means you're going to have to get not just a Mac Jones on a rookie deal. You need to get a really good player.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a tough system, and asks a lot of the quarterback, and asks him to be, very decisive. And if you pick a player who plays the style Mac Jones does, he just has to be so efficient. He just has to be so perfect, right? Like there's just not that much room for error when you play the way that he does. And it's hard to find guys who actually do that. Brady is one of those guys. But here's a question from Nick Andrews. Every wide receiver is still on the board at 14 in this hypothetical. Do they actually pull the trigger on one? Are they trigger shy after N'Keal Harry? I mean, probably not specifically. I think if every receiver is on the board, you absolutely at Jackson Smith and Jigba, absolutely consider him. I think he fits exceptionally well. I think they're gonna like, his profile, the way that he attacks the game very much. I've been saying though, like it makes so much sense for them to go after Darnell Washington though, just because he's a tremendous blocker. He's dominant in that aspect of the game, and it's something that they prioritize. And he's also a weapon in the passing game, and I just feel like that's a match made in heaven. But if they do decide to go wide out, he's the one that makes the most sense to me. I think he accentuates Mac Jones' game the best, because I think Mac Jones is accurate down the field, but he's not a big time downfield passer. And so a guy like Jordan Addison, probably not the best fit. I think that a guy like Quentin Johnston would be, maybe a bit of a reach at 14. Also necessarily maybe not their type of guy, but I think if JSN's there, then you have to take a long look at that if you're not going the Darnell Washington route.
Yeah, I'd be shocked if they did go wide receiver, just because it's not their MO. Not because it's not a position of need, and I don't think they're trigger shy at all. I think they're always going to make the best decision that they think is for the betterment of the team. But I don't necessarily think that they would go wide receiver there, especially considering who could be left on the board offensive line wise. They love offensive linemen. They've always had a very affinity for offensive linemen. And if there's an Osiris Torrance still on the board, there could be a situation where Peter Skoronski's still on the board in that situation. I think guys like that probably make a little bit more sense for them, because I want to say we see with that team, but receiver is not an easy position to hit on, but it's a lot easier to hit on a receiver or get a guy that can be a contributor than it is to find an offensive lineman or a defensive back for that matter. So I think they'll probably go DB or offensive line here, but receiver is 1,000% a need for this team. And I think they could probably get a viable guy with that second round pick or that third round pick, to where they wouldn't necessarily go for a guy in the first round, especially at 14. But another thing that we have to consider here is the Patriots are notorious for trading back. And I think this is a spot that if they don't like what the board looks like in this situation, they could definitely trade back and still get some, very viable guys that could come in and be immediate impacts for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will say this: at 14, you're talking offensive line, you've got to wait for guys to get past the Bears, the Jets, and the Titans. Those are all places where tackle could go. I mean, we could see a run on those guys in the span of about 4 picks. So, at 14, Osiris Torrance might be a guy that's still available, but I wouldn't be surprised if the top 3 tackles are off the board, 1, 2, 3, in a pretty short order. That could be the tackle run that we see right there. So that being said, I feel you. It's not necessarily their MO, but at the same time, you got to get more dynamic at receiver. You have to, whether that is a tight end or wide receiver, doesn't necessarily matter to me. But I think it's a good fit. I will say that. Any other thoughts on the Patriots? Because look, if we're getting Rodgers news before the start of the legal tampering period, or maybe like at the start of the legal tampering period, we might as well be in the middle of Jets conversation. And then if we don't get it, we don't get it. But go ahead.
Let's think about the Patriots situation. As I've heard that they are very interested in the DeAndre Hopkins sweepstakes. I don't know how they will work it out cap wise, or the package that they would have to trade. A second rounder or a third rounder could be very possible for a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. So if they are in the DeAndre Hopkins sweepstakes, it could change the potential of their draft for sure. But DeAndre Hopkins is a guy, Bill Belichick loves DeAndre Hopkins. So he is a guy that I think that would be a really good fit in that situation, especially where they don't necessarily have a reliable guy, a number one guy. He could definitely be that guy that gets those 12 to 15 targets a game. And we know who DeAndre Hopkins is. In his last 8 games, I think he was like number 2 in receiving behind Justin Jefferson. So when he's on the field and healthy, he's as good as anybody in the NFL still. And that would make a lot of sense for them as well. So if they're in the DeAndre Hopkins sweepstakes, it could change a little bit about how they draft.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So final team in the AFC East, the New York Jets. They need a quarterback. Yeah, they do. They could use some offensive line help, and interior defensive line, they need to add a little bit as well. Sheldon Rankins is set to be a free agent. I wouldn't be surprised if they work something out to bring him back. If not, they'll be looking elsewhere. The edge position is currently set, although you never know. We could potentially see movement with a Carl Lawson. You know, he has $15 million coming to him, which is fully hitting the cap. So they could free that up if they want to, if they need to make space for Rodgers. So if that's the case, then they'll have to readdress that. They do have Bryce Huff. They've got John Franklin Myers, who's a tweener inside-outside guy. They've got Jermaine Johnson, who they spent a first-round pick on last year. And they also have, what's his name, from Texas A&M, who they drafted in the 4th round this past year, whose name is escaping me in this particular moment. But their defensive line is pretty well set, but there's room for a little bit more on the interior. In offensive line, right now they have a starting 4. They're missing a center, so that's definitely something that they need to address. They always have to be concerned with Mekhi Becton being injured and Dwayne Brown being a bit aged at this point. So, you know, aside from signing center, they could use more help there as well. And then, you know, as we've talked about, what seems like endlessly, Aaron Rodgers could be going to them. Otherwise, they'll need to make some pretty rapid adjustments in their game plan to bring in a veteran quarterback to start over Zach Wilson. Aside from that, this is a pretty good roster. They've got a lot of guys who are good. They've got a lot of guys who are young. And they've got a lot of guys who have higher ceilings than they've already, you know, put on tape. So, I mean, aside from what you put here, I don't think they have a ton of needs. They could probably do a little bit more at safety. I think that's definitely a position that could be looked at. But they're flexible. So as long as this priority position is taken care of, everything else is kind of, you know, workable in a fine way, and they could be a contender. So here's the thing. I mean, do we think that Rodgers is going to the Jets at this point? Do you think that he's just stringing this out as long as he possibly can? Or do you think that there is a real possibility that he decides to retire or go somewhere else? I mean, look, to me at this point, if he was going to retire, he would have retired. He wouldn't be playing this game, I think, right? So he's going to do something. He's going to play somewhere this year. The question is it in New York or not? Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I think they're ultimately going to end up getting him. Just keep an eye out because I might get it right now, but because it is noon, so we're hitting that legal tampering period. But quarterback, if they don't have him, supposedly like the Texans and Raiders are really in on Garoppolo, but the Jets were a name of a team that was thrown out there that would be interested if they don't get Rodgers here. I would have to imagine, if not that even. Lamar become like a team that actually has to like think about the Lamar thing, because they have to have an answer at quarterback, right? Even if they like Zach Wilson going forwards, it's just this roster's far too good to not, you know, really go in on somebody good. Otherwise, they're kind of in a situation where Washington was last year, where they had to kind of settle for Carson Wentz, which ultimately is like not really finding your quarterback. That's just kind of having to do something and you know, forcing it, which is not a spot you want to be in. So O-line, we've talked at length about. The thing about the interior defensive line is that Solomon Thomas and another guy, their 4th defensive tackle, are also free agents. So I believe they only have, including Quinnen Williams, 2 defensive tackles, Isaiah Mack and Quinnen Williams under contract. Nathan Shepard's also a free agent. So they're going to have to like draft. If they don't sign anybody, they're going to have to draft multiple defensive tackles just because they just don't. They need to add just to roster that position. They need to add bodies.
Yep. Let me just check here because I have I'm wondering if Tanzel Smart is a restricted free agent or not, but I'm going to check.
Somebody might be on the injury designation that I wasn't looking at. Maybe.
I'll take a look here. But Kyron, what are your thoughts on the Jets and the Aaron Rodgers situation as it stands?
Get a quarterback, make a run at the Super Bowl. I don't think it's as simple as that, but it's as simple as that. Like, if Aaron Rodgers plays to his capability, he's still a top 5 quarterback in this league, maybe higher. I think he did a lot with the little this year. It wasn't his best season. He didn't look as golly as we've seen him look in the past. But if Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback of this team and the bones remain the same, they can make some upgrades on the offensive line. Even if you don't make a ton of upgrades on the offensive line and everyone just stays healthy, you get a full season out of AVT and Mekhi Becton. That team is going to be as talented as any team in football. And if Aaron Rodgers is playing like Aaron Rodgers and he takes care of the ball like we know that he can, and if he's motivated to play, that team is as good as any team in the NFL, in my opinion, if we're talking about on paper. So get your quarterback, even if it's Jimmy Garoppolo. The floor of that team is still pretty dang high to me. If Jimmy Garoppolo is the quarterback of that team this year, they probably win no less than 10, 11 games, I believe. They were in every game that they lost this year. The game was there for the taking at the end. Like, let's just be honest about that. So if they have a guy that takes care of the ball and that can, be more consistent in the red area and put more points on the board, that team is as talented as any team in football. And I think they have a lot of upside going forward here. So get your quarterback, whether it's Rodgers or Jimmy, and then you just rock out. You have a 2-year window here before you have to start paying a lot of these young guys, like the Sauce Gardners, the Elijah Vera Tuckers, the Garrett Wilsons, the Breece Halls. If Breece Hall is healthy, there's just so much talent on that roster. Get your quarterback, and then you swing for the fence from there.
So, I mean, here's a question. Let's be honest. Where else would Rodgers go at this point? Where else would he even play? Right? I mean, we look at these teams. We know he's going to the AFC. They've broadcast that they're not trading him to the NFC, right? They don't want to have to face him in the playoffs. They don't have to deal with that. Even better to a team that they played last year, so they don't have to play him for 4 years. Maybe don't ever play him again before he retires. They would love that, right? They'd really prefer that, I think. Certainly put some time between now and whenever they have to see him again. And so, the Raiders, we kind of know they can't afford him, right? There's a reason that they're prioritizing Jimmy Garoppolo, and we haven't really heard much on that front because they're cash poor. They're probably not dropping the kind of cash that it takes to get him on board. So where else is he going to go? I mean, any ideas here? Any thoughts? Because it kind of seems like it's the Jets are nobody, and he's just waiting to announce it.
If it's not the Jets, if it's not the Jets, it's the retirement. It's retirement or the 49ers. But I don't really see a viable situation where I've heard a lot of 49ers rumbling. But I don't really see a viable situation or scenario where that could happen. But there has been talk. I know that for sure. So retirement or 49ers is the only other viable option, in my opinion. And I think retirement is like 85, 90% more likely the scenario. But I just we got a pretty interesting non-free agency related news break. Peter King has just released that the Panthers head coach Frank Reich loves Florida quarterback Anthony Richardson, and he's rumored to be the guy. So that's a very interesting nugget from Peter King. Peter doesn't do that very often, so it's very interesting to see a guy like Peter King be the one to leak that news. So pretty interesting here to get a nugget like that as we begin the free agency period.
And he's not the guy who, is going to release something that a team is trying to like, oh, we like Anthony Richardson, and now the Colts are like, oh, crap, we got to trade up to one. Like, if Peter King's saying that, it's like legitimate thoughts, probably.
Yeah, he doesn't function as a mouthpiece for organizations, generally speaking. He's built up a lot of credibility in his time covering the NFL, and so he's just not just doing that. So, I mean, that's wild. I'm sorry. I understand how insanely talented he is, but that's pretty wild. What do you think about that, Kyron?
I mean, it makes sense to me. If you're gonna swing for the fence, you swing for the fence. I think Bryce Young's the best quarterback in this draft. I think CJ Stroud is right after him. I don't think there's necessarily a large gap between Bryce and CJ. I think Bryce is just he's just better upstairs right now. If you're talking about processing ability, poise, decision making, he's just a step above CJ Stroud. But arm talent, and talk about a guy that's comfortable, a guy that is ball placement, deep ball placement is just ridiculous, is CJ Stroud. So I think those are probably the safest picks at quarterback. But if you're going to swing for the fence, you swing for the fence. And it wouldn't shock me if a guy like Anthony Richardson were to go first overall. Would it be what I would do? Probably not. But it makes sense, especially in a situation like the Panthers where the expectations aren't too crazy. The roster isn't necessarily great right now. So it could be a situation where you could let a guy develop for a year or 2 years and really get the most out of him development-wise. So it makes sense to me. Would I do it? Probably not, though.
Yeah, I can't say that I would. I mean, he's a tantalizing talent, but there's too many guys who I have a lot more comfortability in running an NFL offense in the near future.
I think I'm at a point here where outside of Levis, I'm not going to be upset if any of these guys go number 1 overall, just because I
Really?
understand it. Yeah,
I agree.
Bryce Young's my top guy, but Stroud has answered all the questions when he's needed to. Like, we already kind of talked about how it was kind of tier 1 was him and Stroud, and tier 2 was Richardson and Levis. So that one was already like weeks, a month ago, like established. But the Richardson thing is really just, we talk so often about shooting for the moon at quarterback, and I really believe like the difference between him and Levis is just the lack of time he's had to develop. And there is like a true projection there that this guy has not had an opportunity to really fully become the best player possible yet. This is going to be year 3 of him like really playing at a college or plus level, right? And this is going to be his second
14 football games.
Like he just hasn't yet. And like I don't want him playing week 1, which is maybe the worry I have with him being your top pick in the draft. But I just, as long as you run the guy, because you kind of have to with these quarterbacks early in their career to give you a high floor. I just, from what the more film you watch, the more I like the guy. My grade came out closer to Stroud than it was to Levis when I went through the process of it. And there's a reason why we see all these toolsy quarterbacks succeeding at the NFL level. And I think it's more than just arm talent, right? Like there's an innate athletic ability to that as well. And I think he has it. And I don't know that Levis does.
Well, the thing is my issue is.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say, I have no issue with drafting him. I just don't think that you can justify it first overall, especially because if you're going to make the argument that you just want traits and it's the size that's the issue for Bryce Young, then I mean you have Stroud, who is ridiculously accurate, and again, he doesn't have the same super crazy rare athleticism that Anthony Richardson does, but he is a very good athlete and he has a very good arm. I mean, and he can make special throws, he can make off-platform throws. So it's like, at what point are you chasing that rare athlete where you're like literally bypassing a much more ready player who is also a pretty special athlete and passer in his own right? That's why
here's the tough thing. If you take Bryce Young number 1 overall and it's the right pick, and Bryce Young is a great quarterback and he probably will be, if someone takes Richardson at 6 and he hits, people are going to go back and be like, why didn't you take Richardson number 1? And honestly, like the whole discussion there is stupid because there's a reason you don't take Richardson number 1. Is that you rather have the sure thing than the thing that's going to develop. And either way, like the pick is not going to be wrong. But in reflection, people are going to do this regardless of the outcome, right? In my opinion, because of that, you can't like if you swing for Richardson at 1 and he just never becomes a starting quarterback, like you still swung, right? Like, and yes, maybe you could have the sure thing with a Bryce Young and then you could have been good, but Bryce Young is going to be a good quarterback at the NFL level, and I think he makes any team like a playoff contender immediately with the right pieces. But I think there's a chance Bryce Young is the type of quarterback that kind of sits in that Kyler tier, right? And that's awesome. Like I'm taking Kyler number 1 overall again. Like that's the thing though. This is such a difficult position to scout. Like you can't say a guy is going to be Mahomes. You can't do that. You're not allowed to. Like I won't let you do it. Like it just so Richardson works out. He probably ends up. Richardson's outcomes are that tier or nothing.
And the thing to take in consideration here, if you're looking at the top 4 teams that need quarterbacks, the Carolina Panthers by far have the best offensive line of that situation, and they by far have the best running game situation outside of the Raiders. But if you couple him with that offensive line, at the very minimum, he's going to be protected more than the rest of the guys. And they have a top 5 rushing attack in the NFL last year. So adding a guy like that to a top 5 rushing attack with a very solid offensive line makes a lot of sense to me. They can do a lot of things in the run game with him and kind of ease him into it. I mean, I hate to say this because I don't like to make direct comps like this, but it's very akin to the Cam Newton situation where Cam Newton was able to come into. Mm-hmm. If you're able to get him in early, develop him, let him play, and where he can lean on his rushing ability and the team's rushing ability to where he doesn't have to throw the ball 35, 40 times a game, I think it's a very realistic scenario, and a scenario that could work out very well, especially in that division. They're not in a division where it's going to be hellacious year in and year out. The Saints are a solid team, but the Panthers themselves were right there in contention to win it. The Falcons are going to be rebuilding another year or two. They're not going to be necessarily contenders right away. And you can look at the Bucs and say they're going to be in the same boat. And the news just broke that the Bucs are down to Jacoby Brissett and Baker Mayfield for a free agent guys. So presumably one of those guys who did
Jonathan Jones, New England.
Okay, that makes sense. But yeah, so Baker and Jacoby Brissett are going to be that's going to be one of the quarterbacks you're facing, or Kyle Trask. So between those three, you're looking at the division. The division is not so tough to where he can't go in there and just lean on his athletic ability in that running game and be in a situation where they could potentially make the playoffs this year. It's not far-fetched to say. So when you take that into consideration, the fit makes a lot of sense. The supporting cast right now, if you're looking at not having as much of a viable option outside at wide receiver and tight end, and you're going to lean on the run game heavy, it makes a lot of sense to couple a guy like Anthony Richardson with that offensive line and run game.
Yeah. I mean, I get that. I do. You won't be able to talk me into it as being the right decision, though. Honestly, just how I feel about it.
I don't think there's okay. The right decision is Bryce Young. I don't think that Anthony Richardson is the wrong decision. I don't know if I'm allowed to do that.
I think there are multiple right decisions, and I don't think that's one of them. That's how I'd phrase it, but that's just me.
I just think the supporting cast, it just means so much to the development of these guys. You look at a guy like Trevor Lawrence. Look how bad he looked his rookie year. It wasn't just an inconsistent flash. He had a bad rookie year, and he had a very inconsistent first 8 games of his second year campaign, even with Doug Peterson. It wasn't until about week 9, week 10 to where we saw him transition and start to become that guy. So when you're looking at supporting cast for these young guys, I mean, you look at it, Zach Wilson. He had a very solid supporting cast. We saw very quickly that he wasn't the answer for them at quarterback. So I think when you take the supporting cast of the situation, Anthony Richardson makes sense because of his raw and his just crazy athletic ability. At the very minimum, they're already one of the most viable rushing attacks in the NFL. But then you add a guy like Anthony Richardson, and they're going to be very good off the rip. So, and I think a situation like the Texans is more advantageous for Bryce Young. They have bookend tackles, one of the best tackle duos in the NFL, possibly the best. They have some nice core veteran receivers where he could come in day one and spread the ball around and be very consistent. And then you look into a situation like a CJ Stroud for the Raiders. Could you imagine CJ Stroud getting behind just a solid offensive line if they're able to retool somewhat, and you have CJ Stroud throwing to Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, Mac Hollins, Darren Waller? I think those situations make more sense for those guys, especially when you look at where those teams are projected to go in the future. Nobody's expecting the Carolina Panthers to be a Super Bowl contender, even a playoff contender for the near future. You get a guy like CJ Stroud, who I think is a little bit more pro-ready, in a situation like the Raiders, that's a team that could viably make a jump. You get a guy like Bryce Young in that division in the AFC South, that's a team that can make a viable jump year one. I think those fits are probably better. And when you look at the full scope of things, I think for those players' development in general, I think those will be the best 3 landing spots for those guys. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. But I think the fit is more important than where you pick the guy, because I don't think there's a huge difference between taking a guy with the first pick and then the 4th pick. Like if we see, let's say CJ goes 1, Bryce goes 2, Anthony Richardson is going to go 4th or 5th. I mean, there's not a huge gap between those places and the expectation for where you draft a guy like that at. So I just don't think there's as big of a discrepancy as people may think there is. And I think in the right situation like that, the fit is more important than where you take the guy.
Yeah, I understand. I do. I think for me, it's more about who else is available and the projection that it takes. Because you look at almost any position outside of quarterback, you can say, this guy showed this many traits and this many skills, and these are the physical tools that he has. This is a reasonable projection for him to become this level of player with good coaching. Quarterback is just a different animal. So the closer you are to being a legitimate NFL quarterback, there is an exponential increase in value to me. So does 3rd versus 4th make a big difference? Does 1 versus 4th make a big difference? Generally speaking, no, but it's when you have another guy available who just is closer to what you need that guy to inevitably become as a projection. It's just different for me. I just feel differently about it. And I mean, you look at guys who, you know, I understand that it doesn't always work out that way, but it's just I would always lean towards that more established player, especially if you're not lacking traits, because I can understand the argument against a player that maybe lacks certain physical traits, but if he's still a plus traits guy, but he's closer, I'll surrender the crazy traits to get that more developed player. That's just me. All right. So is there anything else we want to talk about with the Jets? I think we've kind of summed it up. I mean, they're a solid team. They have a few pieces here that they need. They've got picks. They don't have a ton of space. They created some. They can create more. It would be used up if they trade for Rodgers. So I think ultimately, I mean, that's the story of Gangrene, right? Do they get Rodgers or not? And how do they recover if they don't?
And what's the plan after? Which I think right now it's just Zach Wilson, and they'll figure it out. Yeah. All right. There's a lot of stuff going on right now. We're starting to get some of these to roll in.
Yeah.
I gotta.
So I think we'll go. I mean the big one that's happening right now. The running back for the Chargers, Austin Eckler, has requested permission to seek a trade because the preliminary contract talks have gone a little bit sour. So it looks like Adam Schefter just dropped that bomb. So Eckler's big deal. Really big player for somebody, especially a real contender. I don't think it's the kind of player that the Chargers want to lose, but they're going to have to do some damage control with those negotiations. They want that to keep moving forward. So that's the last thing I think. And now let's go and see what happens out there in the wild world of NFL free agency and legal tampering period. All right, guys, thanks for joining me. Find Nick at Nick with Sports on Twitter. He is our director of draft content. You can find player profiles on the 2023 prospects on DefiantTakesFootball.com. Kyron Samuels is at Kyron Samuels on Twitter. You'll see him dropping nuggets all day. You will be able to find him every week with us on our Monday live show. And I think that's going to do it for us. Thanks to Noah Ashley, our producer, at Noah Ashtray Sports. You can find me at Max Dean. You can find Defiant Takes Football at Defiant Takes on all social media outlets. Welcome all to the new team members at Defiant Takes Football, including our new social team. And we will see you all this Thursday.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.